Miss City Secretary if she's got everything. I know we were missing just a few things. Did you get everything like you needed it? Okay, great. I am going to go ahead and call us to order here. We have a special meeting that we're going to go ahead and jump into. We've got an agenda that's posted here for consideration of an ordinance. I am going to ask Councilman Tips, if you don't mind, to pray us into the meeting. We're going to pray here before we get started.
Okay, let's pray. God, we come to you this morning, Lord, and we're so grateful to be able to assemble and come and to help lead and guide the city. And Father, we ask for your wisdom, Lord. We ask for your discernment, Lord. We ask for your eyes, Lord, that you'd give us the knowledge that we need to make good decisions. Father, I pray you bless our city. Pray you bless this council. You bless the staff. And God, we pray that you just guide us today, Father. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Councilman. Appreciate that. So we're officially called to order here. I'm going to hand it over to Mrs. Coggins to see if she'll read us into our public comment section.
Thank you, Mayor. We don't have anyone signed up for public comment today.
Well, I'm exceedingly grateful that Mrs. Coggins doesn't have anyone signed up here today. We do have a full schedule. So we are going to do consideration of an ordinance here. This ordinance is not the Sanctuary City ordinance. This ordinance is the charter amendments and the consideration of things that we might change in our charter. Then we are going to jump right back into our budget work session. Any of you guys that want to stay for that, you're welcome to. And then we also have an APD graduation here today at 12. So we'll have to step out around 11:50, go over there and break, and then we'll come back and we will do our best for the benefit of all of our staff and council of finishing our budget work sessions here this afternoon so that they have as much time as possible to go and make these changes and policies and strategies that we have. So in consideration of all that, I do see one hand raised that will give public comment. I would ask for today, obviously, you're always able, and we always want to listen to you on any topic. But just for the consideration of the time that we're using today for, you would have the ability to comment at the next meeting on anything Sanctuary City or any other item. So if you have a trash can that hadn't been hauled or a lid that's missing, feel free to reach out to us independently. We'll take multiple recesses here today. We are available to you one-on-one, but would hope that public comment here today might be geared towards this charter amendment ordinance. I see Mr. Skank's hand. If you want to come first. Yeah, if you want to come first, you can offer public comment on anything that you'd like. My consideration, we'll put you at this mic right here. My request was just to try to tailor it to the special meeting agenda item. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I don't think anybody has trouble hearing what, and most of you know that the real concern I have, and I'm excited to see that the member terms, city council member, mayor terms, is at least on this potentially to be an individual item, so people can vote up or down on that. And I'm really against that because of just a basic premise that I operate under is individual liberty and freedom, and that basically takes away voter freedom, which is who gets you all in. And I just want to keep that statement moving, that narrative talking about, because you shouldn't take away voter rights by proxy, by moving it into a charter to where, you know, if you're a scoundrel, we'll vote you out in 4 years or 2 years or whatever it is. And after 8 years, if you're the guy that's running and we're rolling and going, why shouldn't we be able to get you back in if we want any of you? So that's a slippery slope that I don't like. Thank you.
Mr. Skank, we appreciate you speaking here this morning on that. Do I have anyone else here today that would like to offer public comment? Okay, seeing no one, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. We'll close our public comment section. We're going to move into item 3A, which is a consideration of ordinance now, number 8144. And Ms. Coggins, do you have anyone that you have that is facilitating any kind of production, or do you have anything up on some slides?
Yes, Mayor. We have Dennis Hawkins with Baker Tilly here to facilitate this discussion with council.
Good morning, Dennis. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
Good. Dennis, we appreciate you coming back. We know we've worked you pretty hard on this one, but I think that we've gotten our money's worth out of you guys. And I also see a couple members here in the audience that served on that board and that committee. And we greatly appreciate all your time and effort in those late meetings where it's like, well, we'll be here an hour. And then 3 hours later, you're still dealing with it. So microphone's yours if you'll walk us through the entirety of the presentation.
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, city staff. Dennis Hawkins with Baker Tilly. It really has been a pleasure working with the committee and with the council. I think over the last few meetings that we've had with the council, we've paid particular attention to your questions and concerns, and I think those have all been dealt with in the materials that we're presenting you today. Just a brief recap of the process. We started in May, and here we are in August with several measures to bring to the voters about updating the city charter. And a brief summary of the proposals. The first proposition is regarding recall of an elected officer. And what this does is, I'll go into more detail as we go through each particular item. Item B increases the size of the city council to a mayor plus 6 council members. This third item changed the term of office to a 4-year term for the mayor and members of the city council, and that there would be a staggering of those terms so that not the full council would turn over in one election. We revised the vacancy provisions so that we're in compliance with state law, and we've included a resign to run provision so that if a member of the council declares for another office, that they would be deemed as having resigned in certain conditions. We're also recommending consideration of a change in the composition of the council to establish 3 geographic areas which would have residency requirements. So the 3 council members elected in those 3 seats would be required to live in a particular geographic area that's defined by the council in compliance with the Voting Rights Act. We also considered term limits. We also considered clarifying the city manager's hiring authority and also appointing the council appointment of the city attorney. The last 3 were not moved forward for consideration today. So at our last meeting on the 23rd, we did a straw poll of the council members and came up with the items that were most pressing in the council's mind. And so those 4 were recall of the elected officer. Secondly, to increase the council to 7 members. Thirdly, to increase the 4-year staggered terms for all members. And fourth, to change the vacancy procedures. Council also asked us to bring back the residency requirement provisions, which we have done today. So now we are referring to mayor and city council recall process now as Measure B, since the sanctuary city will be Measure A. So Measure B will be, or is proposed to be, the recall process. And in this regard, we're substantially reducing the threshold to recall a member of the council or the mayor. We're reducing it basically to 30% of the number of votes cast in the last election for that officer. We're extending the petition gathering period to 60 days. And we're also limiting the filing of a recall during the first 6 months in office, the last 6 months of the office, or within 6 months of a failed recall effort. And there's some slight wording upgrades there as well. And so one of the things that this was important to the committee was to have more accountability among the mayor and the council by making it easier for the community, if they are dissatisfied with a council member, to seek recall. And so that was designed to address concerns about the longer terms. Also, one of the last discussions we had with the council, there was concern that we did not have any particular timelines in the measure, and so we have done that. We made recommending that the recall process be similar to that of initiative or a referendum, that the city secretary would have 21 days to verify the signatures, and then with 5 calendar days of verifying that, the petition would be presented to the city council. And if the member vacates within 5 days of the petition being brought forward, the recall election would be canceled. So there's provision for that. So I think we've addressed the timeliness concerns that some of the council members had. Measure C enlarges the city council to 6 council members and the mayor. And so the size of the council is addressed in 2 sections of Article 5. And so we make those changes in both those sections of Article 5. Measure D extends the terms of office from 2 years to 4 years. And we also have a Measure E, which would stagger the terms so that council members, there would be a transition period where the first election, some members elected in 2025 would only serve until 2027, and others elected in 2025 would serve until 2029. Those members who are serving an initial 2-year term would then be eligible for full 4-year terms in 2027. So we get back on a regular schedule after 2027. And there's a chart in the presentation which gives you an idea of how the schedule of those elections would be held and what seats would be up at what times. Measure F is the vacancy provisions, and here we basically amend the charter so it's in conformance with state law and provide that in certain situations, if the council member resigns with more than 12 months remaining in the term, the council will call a special election to be held within 120 days of the vacancy. As I mentioned earlier, we established the resign to run provision, which is common in many municipal charters in Texas. Measure G is the measure where we're talking about introducing residency requirements. I want to emphasize this is not single member districts, and also that each council member and the mayor will continue to be elected by all voters in the city. It's not being limited to certain geographic areas or only allowed to vote in certain elections. So all residents of Amarillo will have a say in who is on the mayor and who is on the city council. So the 3 council members that will be elected, the mayor and 3 council members would be elected on an at-large basis, meaning they could live anywhere within the city. 3 council members will be elected serving from specific geographic areas. They must maintain residency in those areas. So this establishes a way to have more geographic representation among the council. And in your presentation packet, there are a number of maps showing different scenarios of districts or geographic areas. So the City Council's first reading and pass of the election would call for the 6 measures that we've outlined. So the first reading of the ordinance would be scheduled for next week on the 6th. The second reading would be on the 13th. The ballot measure deadline is the 19th. And then the election would be in November 5th of this year. And assuming all the measures pass, the new charter provisions would take effect for the May 2025 city election. So, we also the committee made several recommendations regarding amendments to the governance and end policies, which I know we'll be working on with the council shortly. And also, and so we'll take those matters up in more detail as we go through the governance and ends. And with that, in the interest of time, be happy to answer any questions. We have Brian, the city attorney, is here. Mr. Hyde is here also, who we've worked with on the final language before you, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Dennis, gentlemen?
So, with the sanctuary city ordinance, we're now looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different items that voters will have to choose from.
That's correct, council member.
So that kind of goes a little bit against of our grain of what we talked about before, maybe not having more than 3 or 4, maybe, I think we talked about.
Right. Well, I think there's pluses and minuses. I think the most important thing is that each measure now is a distinct issue. And so I think that there's a greater ability for the voters to be able to discern what the measure is and how they react to that measure. Each one is more specific in nature. In the earlier versions, we had combined certain things together. For example, the terms of office was combined with something else. So if legal advice, we separated the items out into more distinct issues, and so I think it will actually make for a clearer, more understandable ballot for the members of the public.
Yes, and council member, actually Chapter 9, Section 9.004 of the Texas Local Government Code requires that charter amendments be specified to one subject matter. And so because of that requirement, we had to break apart some of the provisions so that a member of the public did not have to vote for something they are against in order to vote for something they are in favor of. And so that's what expanded the number of provisions, is to ensure that we comply with Chapter 9 of the Local Government Code.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for either Mr. Hyde or Dennis? No.
I do have.
Yeah, keep going.
So, one thing that I've kept hearing from various people, and people who've served on this body before, is that there is a real concern that, to the point of changing anything with how we elect our officials, whether it's adding geographic requirements or just at times adding number of members, opens us up to extreme liability of legal action that would force us to go to single-member districts. And I know we talked briefly about this in the committee meeting with Mick McCamey, but George, can you kind of walk me through that issue, and what may be similar to 10 years ago versus now, what's different now, and what our liability is of having the courts ultimately, or a lawsuit, or courts ultimately determining how we elect people, and are we at real potential of having that forced upon us if we make any changes, even voter-approved changes?
Yes, council member, I'll be happy to. So, and I want to say 10 years ago, maybe 12. The older I get, the shorter period of time it is. But a decision by the United States Supreme Court that was authored by Justice Ginsburg was removed the previous pre-clearance requirement for every election that has occurred in Texas as well as throughout the United States. The court found that the underlying facts that were present were no longer present in our society, and felt that that was no longer necessary. That changed the role of the Department of Justice with regards to ensuring that elections are done in a fair manner as a precondition to calling an election. With that, so that's one of the big changes. Now, the second issue specifically for the city of Amarillo is that the ability for you to change from 5 to 7 is an opportunity for you to consider whether single-member districts should be used for purposes of selection of candidates for office. And that process, however, based on the information that I've been given up to this point, would be somewhat futile here because you have such an integrated living or residency program by different racial and other protected classes. And so in order for districts to make sense, districts would have to be able to consolidate a particular minority into a majority vote for a particular office holder. And because that was previously actually evaluated in the city of Amarillo and it failed, that they were not, a demographer was unable to identify a specific area of town that would have a particular minority in it sufficient to create a district that would have any effect. It does not appear likely that any attempt by any other entity or person to try to force single-member districts onto the city of Amarillo would be successful. Secondly, is that the process of having this individual qualification does create some bifurcation, if you would, of the opportunities for individuals from different areas of your community to participate as an elected official in their government. But it doesn't necessarily define any particular class of a person that would be the person that would want to participate. Obviously, I tell every elected official when they come on board the first time that I meet that I thank you for your service and that no good deed goes unpunished. So, in my legal opinion, based on those facts, I think that there is a remote chance that the single-member district type of program would be enforced upon you by a federal district court if challenged. The latest one I found that had been challenged was a modification to the charter of the city of Houston in 2021, where the ACLU attacked that opportunity to change a hybrid system similar to what you're adopting now. And in that case, once filed, it was actually abandoned by the ACLU. And the city of Houston currently has a pending motion for summary judgment to dismiss that case. And so I think that you are in reasonably good position if this is what the citizens want to go to 7, that can occur without necessarily having a significant risk. Lawyers can never guarantee anything, but I think that anyone with about $400 can file a lawsuit. But I think at this point that the chances of success would be remote in forcing you to get into single-member districts.
And then I remember Mr. McCamey said, well, really his opinion was, you're at no more at risk of electing 7 at large than you are at 5 at large. I mean, someone could sue us right now if they wanted to.
Correct.
Because it's really not changing the method by which we elect.
Yeah, no, and Mick and I are colleagues and friends. We've known each other for decades, and I agree with him wholeheartedly that it really matters on the demography. And if the demography doesn't show that you have an area, and you can see these areas very clearly in places like New York and Chicago, and where migrants came and gathered in particular districts. But it does not appear that Amarillo grew that way. It grew as an entire community rather than having individual, Chinatown or whatever, all the different things like in San Francisco, for instance. You don't have that here based on the information that I've been provided.
Thank you.
Any questions over here on this side? Okay, I do have a few. So today, will you describe in the proposed ordinance what section of the proposed ordinance is ordinance, and then what section would outline the ballot language and what we would expect to see at the poll?
Yes, Mayor. So if you review the ordinance itself, the first page are what are called recitals. They are the factual information, the legislative record, if you will, that supports passing this provision or this law. And so an ordinance is a issue of law, and it is being passed by ordinance because you are declaring certain provisions to be law, because your charter is, in essence, your constitution, the city's constitution as a home rule city. So when you go into the sections, those are the things that are being actually placed into law, which are that the recitals are true. Section 2 that calls the special election. Section 3 identifies the measures. The measures themselves are the question that you're asked at the ballot box. The proposition that you read is a description of the effect that your vote for or against will have in connection with the provision of the charter. So if you look at Section 3.1, it identifies the question, shall Article 2, Section 24, recall, subsections B, D, E, and H of the city charter regarding the recall process be amended to read. And then the specific language, what the law would be changed to so that the citizens know what they're voting on, is provided to them. And then once that is provided, then they have the opportunity to vote for that provision or against it. And so the measure itself is the question, and then later on, as you go through these measures, it identifies that's what you would be seeing on the actual ballot itself. And then as you go into the section...
Section 4?
Yeah, Section 4, you start with the propositions. Thank you. And what the propositions do is they explain what for lack of a better word for lawyers, legal mumbo-jumbo, the specific lawyer words that are going into your charter do. And so the propositions are explanatory with regards to what this statutory language will have an effect on your public and how you operate your government in Amarillo. And so as you go through that, you'll see each one of them is also identified, and the effect is placed without the or technical language.
If we could, Mr. Hyde, what I want to do is kind of gear our conversation for a second, not for this purpose of us passing an ordinance, but for the purpose of trying to envision and imagine what it looks like November 5th at the ballot box. And so can you describe for me how much latitude this body has in what that looks like when you're at the ballot box? So if you pass this as written, right, let's say we made a few small amendments and we get a pass through here today, do we have the opportunity to represent things and have this posted at the ballot or at the polling place, or do we need this amount of language? And so what I'm concerned with is the issue of voting twice for one proposition. So there's a measure. I don't understand what a measure is unless there's a measuring cup next to it, right? So I don't care what a measure is. I just know you wanted me to read a bunch of stuff. I kind of got the gist, so I clicked 4. And then I went later, and there was a proposition, and I'm like, well, I already clicked on that one. I don't know that I need this. So I tried to go past it or whatever. Maybe I didn't vote on it. And so, like, is there a duplication, and is that needed?
So the propositions that are shown on your ordinance are not going to be specifically identified in your ballot.
Okay.
It is information which is a summary. What should be on your ballot is the measure and the language that is provided in the measure. So typically, you'll see in the ballot box what you'll have is on the ballot will be the measure and then the description of the change. Mm-hmm. the proposition language itself is something that is to help educate the public, but will not be seen on the language of the proposition will not be seen on the ballot.
So when would this be seen? Just like if it was printed and posted where you wanted to read the full ordinance, let's say, or where else?
The propositions should be something that, at least in my experience, have been used for get out the vote type of programs for communities like the city, where they will promote those information to provide the voters with language. They typically put this on your website. You make it available on your bulletin board here at the City Hall and other areas that people review, so that they will be able to better understand the statutory language that they're voting for or against. And then also the language, the proposition language can be made available at every polling location, so that anyone that wants to get better educated with regard to the item before they vote can get a copy of it there, review that material there, and be educated before they get into the ballot box.
That's very helpful. So council needs to consider so take, for example, a simple one. So Section 4.2, Prop C, right? Amend Article 5, Section this, council members shall be designed, council place 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Mayor and each council member. So you can see this is 6 council plus a mayor, right? So that's your Prop C. So if you go back to measure C right here, you see once again, municipal government, city of Amarillo shall consist of, which shall be composed of 6 council members with each office. Okay, 1 through 6. So that is very succinct. That's very clear. I think it's easy to understand. I think that is us doing the best job that we can, listening to our subcommittee, putting this in a format that can be digested and voted on, right? Now, if I look at Measure B, there's a lot of language in there for the recall. I would assume every word in there is needed, and that we don't have much latitude in simplifying that one. If you look at B, and then you go to the Section B mayor recall process, once again, pretty lengthy description under the Prop B, and outlines it very well again. So on either one of those, that's not much of an elevator speech on Prop B, right? So like I'm going to have a hard time with that one in the way of like just a get out the vote. This is what we're trying to do. So the recall's difficult. Some things are just complex, and it's going to take some description in order to adequately represent it right.
And to your point, Mayor, is that the recall provision includes due process language. So there's procedures that you are adopting as law. In the provision of the number of council members and slots, you're not creating procedures. You're just identifying the number that is going to constitute the body. And so that's why you see the recall provision being much more complicated and longer, because you're developing those procedures that you don't need in the prior example that you provided. That's
great. So I'm gonna drive us a little further down the road here, just in kind of consideration of everything we're trying to present and the way in which it's presented. Yes, sir.
George, and I don't know, is there a way to say, I mean, on a couple of these, just for clarification, to say not only are we, I don't know, let's just take C, that says basically we're going to 6. Is it appropriate or not to explain where we are now? Does that make sense, to move the city council from 4 to 6? Is that too?
Like the problem with that is that your current position is not on the ballot.
Correct.
It's not something that they're going to vote on. And
right.
So by putting in the information there, it actually is not an objective language with regards to what's going to be on the ballot. And that's what the law generally requires for these provisions. If, again, where you are today is something that is a objective, neutral statement that the city council can direct the city manager to provide as get out the vote information regarding this. Once you adopt this, I want to make sure the council is very clear. Individual council members are unrestricted by law with regards to your ability to encourage or discourage votes on this item, on any item that you call for election.
Individually.
However, you need to ensure that your conduct does not include the application or execution of any resources that are available through the city. And these provisions, it's actually a felony in Texas for you to use government resources to oppose or support a measure that once you've called the election. And so, and some of the cases with regards to this have been as minimal as using a copier to copy flyers that you wanted to put out. So, you wouldn't necessarily think that a copier would be an instrument of government corruption, but it can be under these circumstances because of the manner in which the law has been strictly enforced. So, but please don't take that as it means that restricts you individually. You have a First Amendment right to speak out on any matter of public concern that you want, and you don't lose that right when you become elected. In fact, you're probably one of the most educated people to be able to discuss this item with the rest of your constituents, and I would encourage you all to do that.
Okay, so what you're saying is it's not our obligation to educate the public, because I would feel, as crazy as it sounds, that I don't know that a lot of the public knows that we're at 4 and a mayor,
Right.
So you're saying that's not really our job, or it's not even.
It shouldn't be
by
part
law. It's not a part of this, because I feel like if we state, hey, we are at 4 and a mayor, and we're going to 6 and a mayor, I feel like more people would understand that versus just reading this going, well, I don't even know what this means.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
we're just going to 6 mayor. So what you're saying is not appropriate to put on the ballot. It's not necessarily the government's job to educate. It's up to them.
When you start adding what I'll call as comment to these provisions,
Yeah.
then you risk influencing the language itself
Yeah.
being challenged as being influencing somebody to vote for or against the measure.
Yeah, I feel like I've read this on the ballot though before, that it says like some of the Texas amendments that they have stated what this, we're moving from this to this. That's why I'm kind of questioning this. Is it doesn't seem like we're doing that, which I mean.
Right. No, you have had prior elections here on measures that have included that language. It's just that, in my opinion, based on the evaluations I've had over the last quarter century, the more information that you provide of that type, the greater risk you have in a challenge on the ballot measures that you've adopted, that they are influential on the voter. And when you have those kind of challenges, it's costly, and then it also can end up requiring a new election to occur without that language.
So stating the facts of the current council stands at 4 and a mayor, this proposition or this measure would move to 6 and a mayor. I guess that's been challenged.
Well, look,
It's the imposition. It's that what's wrong with 5?
Yeah.
What's wrong with 4 and a 1? And so by placing it that we're at 4 and 1 now, if that's done in such a way that someone can argue that you're saying that this is something it's wrong to have 4 and 1,
Yeah.
that we need to have 6 and 1, that's the challenge.
right.
The whole point of the vote.
But I do want to point out, so is this language what we would be voting on with no changes? This will be on the ballot.
This is
So
what you're adopting.
Go to section 3.2, measure C. So section 3, measure C, not prop C. Enlarge the number of city council members from 4 to 6. That'll be the title. Correct? Yeah. And then below it, it'll state. So the only real difference from like maybe what Councilman Tips has seen in the past, moving from, say, an amendment to move from 5 to 7 total members, like now this says, enlarge, and then below it says government shall consist of. So you could have put in there, an amendment in order to move from 5 to 7 total. You didn't do that. You put that in the title up above in the procedural change of we are enlarging by 2.
Correct. And that was intentional to ensure that it's objective and not suggestive language.
Okay.
To avoid those kind of attacks on your charter.
Okay. So let me go back to kind of where I want to go here would be the format and the presentation. So Measure B was simply Measure B because in a period of week-long discussions, almost 2 months, it happened to come up first. It doesn't necessarily sit first for any other reason, correct?
Correct, and it is totally within the discretion of council to order the propositions in any manner that it desires to do so.
So describe to me what our latitude is here today. If we have a discussion, we say, well, Measure B is lengthy, and actually Measure C might actually be our number 1 priority. So let's move Measure B to Measure F, and then let's move, the other ones up. And then what if we said, on Measure E, I want to strike this one. So, in the need to vote on this, here today in order to meet our schedule for our next meeting for first and second readings, what do we have the ability to do and still make a motion, give direction, and have it come back for a second reading?
Sure. So it has been presented in a form that is approved as to form, so legally. So, but if you want to reorder these, and I'll for the public, it's just like rearranging your furniture in your living room. You can do it any which way you want to do it, wherever you put the couch. So if B goes to the end, then what you would do is you would move to adopt this ordinance with the following modifications.
Okay.
And you would say the recall is Measure F, and then
Right.
the other item is Measure B, and so forth.
So
I only say that and you can even change it to A but we had reserved A to be the initiative petition,
Right.
since that was brought by the people.
Right. I think there's some wisdom in that, in the way in which that's an initiating petition committee. And so let's assume we leave that alone for conversations here today. We're going to start with B. So I would provide council with a little bit of feedback on my end, and then love to engage in a short discussion here with you. So we're doing pretty good on time. Measure B, though it is important, is lengthy in its presentation. I would move to include Measure B, not strike it, but to move it down the list to substitute the council vacancy measure. So where is that in a measure? That's F. So I would move to strike Measure F and replace that with Measure B. And then move everything up 1 letter. The reason being, this council vacancy, a method to fill, is a legal requirement to get in line with state law. State law already supersedes, and Mr. Hyde, you tell me if I'm leading anywhere I don't need to, but like state law already supersedes what we would have in the charter. So even if our charter speaks to it in an antiquated way, you're still going to go back and pull that state statute and enforce that. Am I correct?
Almost. With regard to this particular item, it is a provision in statute that is elective. And so without this language, you would not have the ability to appoint someone within that last 12 months. You would have to call an election. But this is a specific statutory amendment that occurred about 8 years ago that provides you the option in your charter to adopt this language so that you don't have to call an election.
So you just appoint somebody if they're within that last 12 months.
You would have to call an election within the next election date without this language.
Okay. Go ahead. You have a question?
I was just curious how you got appointed as place 1
What do you mean appointed? I was elected.
in the middle of the term when the lane.
Oh, no. She had expired. So it was a full 2 years for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the provisions change based on.
I don't know that we've had an appointment in some time.
We had one back in our 2017 or it was the 2015 council. Dr. Eads moved and Lisa Blake was appointed.
Oh, okay. So
So so it's another one of those conditions, and so I'll be more specific. When you move, if the charter elects to move to 7 members, you fall under a different provision of the Texas Constitution. And in that position, with 7 members, you will be required to hold an election if somebody says resigns or is absent in, say, 9 months. But you're going to have an intervening election date. If that occurs, then you have to call a special election. With this language added to your charter, you would not have to call a special election. You would not have to spend the money to have that special election. You would be able to appoint somebody.
Okay. Well,
So,
very, very helpful in the education piece then. So let me withdraw. I would propose to move the recall process down to measure F, and then I would take the advisement of legal counsel here to leave measure F in, but move it down as well. And then the measure G, adding the residency locations, I can see the desire there. I think if there was any that I would be willing to move forward without, it would be that one for sure, now knowing that the vacancy is something that procedurally would be impactful with a resignation. So, council, any discussion on rearranging any of these, or does anybody feel a strong desire to leave them as is?
Well, I would agree with you. Now, you had made a motion, or not a motion, but a proposed to move B, like strike F and put B in F spot, but then
Move
you said
everything
bring
up.
F back. But what are you proposing? B
So
goes?
to simplify this, let me say it again. So not removing F any longer, keeping F. C, D, and E would move up to B, C, and D.
Okay.
Item B would become item E in that order.
Okay.
And then F and G would remain with the consideration of I'm asking for any discussion on item G. If we would like to keep that on, I believe Councilman Simpson's concern earlier is now we have all of this, plus a national election.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, there is one reason that they were presented in this order, and this was a committee decision, was to present the proposals in the order in which the matter appears in the charter. So that's how we got to measure the recall being the first one, because that was the first issue in the charter. So we just tried to take them sequentially as you walk through the charter making changes. That was how that order was determined.
That's really good feedback on that. I would say, though, that is very chronological and I think good organization. But in the applicability of that, not needed for our public to know how to vote on them. And I would prioritize the presentation and the ability to communicate simplistically on the front end, and just try to put the lengthier ones at towards the end. Yes, sir, Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, just that's exactly what Chapter 9 allows you to do, is that there may be issues of importance, there may be issues of specificity here, because, as you said, it's a national election. It may even be length in order to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to vote on all of the items that they have. So any of those rational bases that the city council votes by majority are absolutely provided for in state law for you to do.
So I do have two other things just to hit. If you'll look at section 4.3 Prop D, if you look at this, and I know this is kind of the summary of it, but I want to compare it back to the actual measure. That last line says, with the terms staggered as established by ordinance. I want to make sure that legally I'm not tying myself to a potential fail. So let's say that staggered terms being proposed as a separate measure passes, but then the additional 2 fails. So we would then be staggering the 5 that we have and working on that. So let's say the extension of terms goes from 2 years to 4 years and that fails, we would then not be staggering 2-year terms. Is that the way this language represents?
No.
Yeah, that's my question, because if you start going through the various scenarios of, if C passes and D and E doesn't, or if E
Right.
passes and C and D doesn't, if we enact staggered terms, but we don't add members to the council or change, then we have elections every other year,
Well, every year.
or every year.
Yeah, so the staggered terms would be difficult with 5 members, but possible if you had 5-member council with 4-year terms, correct? Because you're still running every 2 years, and the public will understand what's going on. However, if you failed on your additional 2 council members and you failed on your 4-year extensions, I need to make sure that my staggered terms would not be implemented, because now my public doesn't understand who they're voting for or why, because we are running every May. And I haven't done what I set out to do, which is to create some continuity and some solidity, in this council. Now I've got everybody running all the time. And honestly, the public can't remember who's up and who's not. So how do I change that in here in order to make sure that that's contingent?
We would have to create another measure.
Could we combine a measure instead of create another measure? And here's what I'm looking for.
Mayor, if I may, just real quick.
Yes, sir.
What about just striking Proposition E?
Well,
E, the staggered terms?
Well, because you're already staggering it. You've already got a provision in E.
right. This would be staggering the terms for whether or not you turn to 7.
E does.
Okay, Brian, explain a little
Yeah,
further.
let me explain what I'm saying. In Proposition D, 4.3, it has to do with extending the term limits from 2 to 4 years, okay? And so what it says, though, is it says, with terms staggered as established by ordinance, meaning that if Proposition D doesn't pass, then there is no stagger, okay? Because there is, if you remove Proposition E, then the only way it would ever be staggered is if Proposition D passed.
So essentially, D is already combined.
Correct. And that's
D
why
and
I'm
E.
saying you don't, in my opinion, you don't need E, and if to achieve what you're trying to achieve with kind of what you're proposing.
So I think that's probably where my head is. So if you guys can weigh in as well, and then Councilman Tips, if you want to jump in. I don't know that I had considered the ability to separate the staggered terms from the 4-year term. What I wanted to make sure I separated was the consequence of ending up with a staggered term on an existing 2-year. And so, like, I'm good with going to 4-year and staggering those. I wouldn't be good with staying at 2 years and having to stagger those, regardless of number count.
I mean,
Yes, sir.
you're the expert, but I would agree with Brian. It looks like Prop D is a combination of, and puts forth that if it would be a 4 and staggered as established by ordinance, that Prop E does not look like it's necessary, then therefore it solves the problem that Mayor's putting out there.
Well, and I would say that maybe Measure D doesn't specifically speak to it as much as Proposition D. So the way the wording is in Proposition D, Mr. Hyde, should we match that wording in Measure D to make sure that we're kind of above reproach on that? Because if you read Measure D, in the years, it does speak to the 4-year terms, but does not specifically state, like, with the term staggered as established by ordinance. That is what Prop D states.
So just so I'm clear, you guys are saying that the stagger piece would be enacted by an ordinance by the city council should this pass?
Well, all of these will be enacted by an ordinance by the city council when they pass. However, what we're saying is that staggered terms would be tied to a 4-year extension and not treated as a standalone item. Meaning, I don't want the public to have the ability to enforce staggered terms on 2-year term council members regardless of count, because then we are running every year, not every other year. And it's chaos. Like, nobody will know who's up or why or what position or what place. And so I think you would feel like your mayor ran every year, honestly, and not know why you didn't see him on the ballot. I really dislike that guy. I was hoping to vote him out now. Why do I have to wait another year? So my specific question, Mr. Hyde, probably goes to you. Measure D, amending that language?
Yeah, what the proposition does is it uses the language with regards to promoting continuity, which is the substitution of the more specific language here, which talks about the conforming amendments required by the Texas Constitution. And so that's why those are different. But I think that there is a point that that your city attorney makes with regards to the 2 to 4 year terms being staggered terms is the obligation in D, where you may, in order to avoid that, is to remove Proposition E.
Right. So you remove Proposition E, or in your theory of combining them, because you would have them in Proposition D specifically spelled out where it says with the term staggered as established by ordinance.
Correct.
Yeah, and then we've rolled into this by the call of the election. So in 2025, these positions will be called for election. That would be 2-year, and these would be 4-year. Now, how we set who's going to run for 2 and who's going to run for 4 is to be determined. But the fact that we would have the ability under this ordinance to set 3 members if we added the 2, or 2 members to hold them at 2 years, is very spelled out and specific in this, not challengeable.
Correct. Once it creates the 4-year terms, from 2-year to 4-year terms, the staggered provision, what your Constitution, so to speak, your charter is saying, is that it is enabling the city council to determine that by ordinance. So once you've adopted this by ordinance and it becomes part of your charter, you would have another ordinance.
An ordinance that would set these are the 2-year terms, these are the 4-year terms. So we've staggered them by ordinance now, not necessarily by charter.
So, but we're changing all of them under this language to 4-year terms. What we're doing is we're staggering the election dates so that every 2 years you would have an election, but for instance, it may be only 3 of the members, 3 council members on 1 2-year, then 2 years later it'd be the other 3 and the mayor. Right. It would go back and forth.
I think that's what Councilman Kraft is keying in on, is there a better solution here now that we have the opportunity to stagger these by charter, not to rely on ordinance alone? Or maybe you could clarify.
No, so I was just clarifying that if this were to pass, we would set the stagger as council by another ordinance that we pass on dais, correct?
That's correct. And
so we would be the ones that choose who goes for 2 years and who goes for 4 years in the initial setup.
Correct. And for purposes of brevity, that was one of the recommendations that I made, because if you do a transition provision, you have to add the transition provision as part of this measure. And you think recall is long?
Yeah.
You typically, I've had to put charts into charters before to show, do you get extended in office a year because now we're going to move to 4 and you're not going to be the person that's elected first or not? You have to do all of that in your charter if you're going to do it by charter. And I found it more procedurally effective and efficient for those determinations to be made by the city council later on, so that the city council in their individual positions can debate and discuss why I should be the one that goes last, or I should be the one that goes first with regards to the new terms when you start to transition into 4-year terms.
So to be clear, if Prop D passed, there would be an obligation on this council to then set forth the staggered and the.
Correct.
That's the way this states.
And what would typically occur is that once those terms are there, once half of your terms expired, then you would be a holdover, is what the Constitution calls it, and you would remain in office for another potentially 2 years until your office would come up to election. So you may be in office currently, for instance, for 3 years, while at the end of the term, the existing terms for the other half of you, you would be up for election. Because we have to extend or shorten terms of office in order to get you into the 4-year cycle.
Or in 2025, everybody runs and somebody was a 2 and somebody's a 4. We could make this happen a couple different ways, right?
Well, but if you've changed the terms to 4 years, then everyone has a 4-year term. And so what is typically done is that because you've already been elected, half of you would go to the next election and you would start your 4-year term then. And then the other half of you at the next year would go to your 4 term at that point.
Okay.
And that way, everyone has maintained their office in a complete term. You've never had a shortened term. But those that have gotten extended for 1 year is to allow for this rollover to occur.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. I still got a few more. Does anybody have anything? I'm going to move to a different one. Does anybody have anything on the staggered term one?
Well, so have we moved to strike Prop E?
Honestly, I probably would be looking at striking Prop E and then moving the recall position down. But instead of moving it to, would we move it to F? We would now move it to E. Move the other ones to B, C, and D.
And if the city council wanted to take action on that specific motion with a second, then it would be appropriate to do so now, and then we can move on to the rest of the ordinance.
I do have a comment. It's more high-level, bigger picture. So, but I can say it now, or if you want to wait till we go through this.
Oh, I'm making notes, so go ahead and say it now, and then that way if I move on, we won't lose it.
Well, we've been presented with a new set of facts today that we've not had before.
Okay.
Which is separating these out separately. Because going into today, I did not know that we would have legal requirements to do that. And we're sitting here kind of trying to go through figuring this thing out. And we've got 3 months to educate voters to figure this out. I like all these things that we're doing here, but I want to set it up for success. And I don't know, I've got a real concern of kind of where we are on the time frame and being able to, I'm just trying to figure out now, and I thought I kind of knew this, but now we're changing. But to me, that we're going to add more of these things to it. Even in the other scenario, were we going to have, is 3 months enough for people to really get a good understanding of this? We all get it. And I thought in 2020 we actually combined the 4-year staggered in that one. So and I thought that we could do it again now, but I'm just finding out today that's not the legal way that you're supposed to do it. So, by adding a whole lot more, and this is and I'll say my fault. I said let's go look at the charter, but the way we've set it up, we now have ourselves backed into a corner where we're coming up to the D-Day of when we have to decide something, and then today we have a whole new way of looking at this that I'm trying to digest.
I'd love to jump in on that with you, and I know we had touched on this in our previous meeting, and so I want to recap one option that you're identifying that for me is not a valid option, and the reason being is this. And so keep in mind, I've always been height deficient, I think is as we call it. Don is not. So I'm used to working from a deficit right? So I'm going to give you the fact that we're working from a little bit of a time deficit, but I don't think that's the end of it and why we shouldn't play the sport, right? So I think we have done the work. We're moving forward here, and here's what I would ask you to consider. You don't have any additional time to educate your public, because if you try to educate your public over the next 3 months, what you're telling them is everything I'm telling you right now is 3 years later. So I'm going to educate you now, but then you don't get to vote on it now. So I want to start telling you what I'd like to do, but I'm not willing to put it in front of you as an option. So this year, in November, you don't get to vote on any of this. However, then in May, I want you to know you are going to vote on this, but it won't be enacted in May. You're going to wait 2 years to the following May before it would be enacted. So if you put these propositions up in May, you don't have those positions available to run underneath those considerations because they haven't passed. So all 5 of us are running for 2-year terms, and we're asking you to vote for us to have 4-year terms, but we don't get 4-year terms. We only get 2-year terms because that's what our charter is stating at that time. You have something, Mr. Dennis?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that was one of the things the committee was very cognizant of, and that's one of the reasons that the committee recommended in the November election, so that you could deal with all these charter changes or potential charter changes, so that you set up the May 2025 election to be a clean election, in the sense that the new charter provisions take effect in 2025 as far as electing council members. And so what we were trying to do also was, one of the comments that we heard several times at the committee was that one of the reasons people speculated the 2020 measure failed was because people felt that this was a way for the council at that time to manipulate it so they could extend their terms. So that was another thing the committee was aware of. They wanted to do it such that it was very clear that what you're voting on now is what you're voting on now, and it takes effect the next election.
But that was in a November election, though.
I'm sorry?
That was in a November election.
Correct, but
It was not in May.
No, but the charter change proposal in 2020 was what was rumored to be a ploy by the council members at that time to extend their terms. And so what we're trying to do is make the changes in November so that a May election is clear. In the May election, you would be voting for people 7 perhaps with 4-year terms.
Right.
Or set the table correctly so the voters know what's going to happen in May of 2025.
So to go back to the deficit here. So we do have a little work left here, but, we're in the back of the house still. We're in the kitchen. Like, we can still take this out to the table and present it very well. 3 months is an adequate amount of time, in my opinion, to educate the population on what we're looking at. Now, it is a concern in the presentation, the order that we put it in, the amount of language that we have to put in it, but...
And now we're almost doubling the number that we thought we were going to have.
Now, I'm with Councilman Simpson on this one. I think that in the risk here, the risk is not in not putting it up in November. The risk is what we've seen government do time and time again. You had a really good idea, you had some low-hanging fruit, and then you went for everything in the kitchen sink, and everybody voted against it because they got tired. They got ballot tired. They got ballot beat. And so, a $100 million proposition, we all needed it, and then we go to vote on it, and it's $550 million. And so, we can't do that now because every person around the table all added every little thing in that they've ever wanted. So it goes back to an incremental mindset. And us saying, look, are we putting the maximum amount of priorities out with the minimum amount of wants? And so separate wants and needs. Yes, sir, Dennis. Or Mr. Hyde, go ahead, and then we'll come back.
And I'm not by any sense of the word saying that the mayor is right or wrong, or you're right or wrong, but the legislature, in its infinite wisdom, set a deadline for purposes of elections to be this year at the 19th of August. And so it has determined, in its infinite wisdom, that August to November was sufficient amount of time to educate a voter. I'm not saying that's right, but that is what why the statute is set that way, was that the legislature had determined that amount of time was a sufficient amount of time to prepare for an election. So,
So if I could, I just want to go back to, I feel like it's an all or nothing less with the November election, meaning I would not want to do all this work and put it on a May election and then try to communicate that, because I think it's so difficult for our population to try to understand what we're doing.
I understand that. I'm just trying to catch up to some new information that was given me today, and what I want to do is whatever we're putting out there, to your point, to set up to be successful to improve our government. And, I thought going into this, okay, this was what was, going to be voted on, but we're adding a lot, excuse me, a lot more moving parts to it. So I'm just I'm just being honest with you. It just causes me a little bit of concern of whether we are setting it up for success by doing this. And
Okay, so I hear exactly what you're saying. Let me hit my last point, and then we'll come back for some further discussion. My last point that I'd like to hit is Measure G. So I'm not putting words in Councilman Simpson's mouth at all, but I am recognizing the fact that it's hard to digest all this as a mom of 3 kids who's running back and forth to soccer practice and getting school and everything else, and you're trying to be a good citizen. So Measure G for me has the least amount of benefit for the most amount of risk. And here's why. You guys put in this language under Measure G, elected at large. So if you look at B, the mayor, council, place 1, 3, 5 may reside anywhere. They are elected at large. And if you go back down to C, then you're going to spell out 2, 4, 6, and they're going to say by a majority of registered voters within the city at the bottom. So even your language gave the opportunity to let's just say the other side, to point out the fact that, like, oh, you're going towards single member district, or oh, this is not everyone at large. We are specifically saying all 7 council, if increased, are elected at large, right? So what we've done, if you go back to Proposition G, page 7. Line 2, mayor and 3 council members shall be elected on an at-large basis, and that 3 council members shall be elected and subject to a residency of 3 geographic places. So we would need to do a much better job of separating out the criteria here. It's a criteria for you to reside in one of these areas. It is not contingent upon the voters. The voters are all at large. All 7 are elected at large, correct?
Correct.
Okay, the only issue is 3 places, if these 3 places are a result of the additional 2 places, then you would have a residency requirement. So once again, this is a lot of communication, so we can run back down this road. What if which one is it now? I'm going to say it the wrong way, but C, current C, fails. So we don't go from 4 to 6. Okay, well, so we don't have anything here for residency requirement, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So that is a question people are going to ask, is like, well, are you going to end up with 3 residential requirements if you only keep 5 members? No, you're going to keep all 5 at large, but you were going to add the 2, and those 2 were at large with residency requirements, and you were going to go back and pick up 1 to create 3 residency requirements. So, council, is there any wisdom from this side of the table in not pushing forward Proposition G to keep our ballot very, very simple? Well, I shouldn't say very simple. As simple as possible with the complexities of what we're trying to get done.
The one benefit is, right now, the language for purposes of doing this is conditional. If you look at the Measure G, it starts with the word if. So it's a conditional issue in the event something else passes. You may want to consider that if something else passes, that you come back 2 years later with G, if that would be the will of the, because then that if would not be an if. Now you have 7 members. Do you want to then set up a qualification residency requirement after that? But from a Voters' Rights Act kind of argument, keeping G in or taking G out doesn't change the demography of your community. So I don't know that it has any plus or negative impact legally for the council.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Council discussion on item or Prop G.
Well, I think at best, regardless of what we decide, I agree with you, Mayor, that language is confusing because we're all at large, right? I mean, I would say if it's kept, which whether it is or it isn't, is that possible to change? Because it is confusing, because they are all at large.
Right. It could be clarified to identify to focus on, because there's a little bit of a mix that I agree that there's how it's elected versus residency. And so what we would be able to do is just use all residency
All
matters. Is
at
that
large.
that we wouldn't even discuss the at-large portion. It would be that, right now, that
We're not changing that,
four
basically.
of you would not have a residency requirement, and 3 of you would.
Yeah.
That would be the amendment we would make.
Can you tell us the legal capabilities that we would have under our charter? Let's assume we put 4 propositions up and all 4 pass. And this council made a commitment to bring back this residency requirement with an if-then. So if these pass, then following November, we would have an amendment. Is that something that we could do in that November? We'd have to call our own special election at that time, so it would cost us $100,000. Is there any requirement that would keep us from doing it that soon, where we've got to wait 2 years to do it?
Yeah, state law requires a 2-year, I would call it like a standstill agreement, so that you're not changing your charter all the time.
Okay.
So if any one of these provisions is adopted, you will not be able to call another charter amendment election for 2 years. If none of them are approved, then you can call a charter election the following election period.
Okay. So let's assume we are going to have something that will pass here. We're 2 years out. Council, do you guys have any, and Sherlyn, I probably would ask you, because I think you've been the biggest proponent of keeping, as many things on the table for the voters to vote for. And I see the benefit in the residency requirement in what it speaks to in voters' rights and more representation to different parts of the community represents more needs, right? Do you have an opinion on, would you be willing to stand on this one, even though it's somewhat confusing in language? We clean up the language? Or do you think we could move this one off the table and come back with a commitment that we would put this back up in 2 years with further amendments that I think we would need?
I think at this time, I'd be willing to leave it off, come back in 2 years with another amendment. What we've got is a lot of moving pieces, trying to get those pieces put together to make it work. And looks like we may have got the cart before the horse a little bit with the language and stuff we got to use.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's just my opinion. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Okay. Councilman Kraft, what's your opinion over there?
I still stand by my statement. Last time we discussed this, allowing them to have the opportunity to vote on it. I think that's how the public speaks with the government and gets their needs, wants, and that's how they can act on it. That's just where I stand.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Councilman Tips, you got a question or a position on this one?
Well, I'm going both ways with, like you said, voter fatigue. There's a lot of language here. There's definitely changes we need to make, in my opinion, and it's tough to, as a citizen versus as a council member, right? Whether I'm for or against certain ones of these, the ultimate job of us is to put it before the voter. But there's definitely some changes I think that need to be considered. Some that have been considered before and failed, but could have been for several different reasons. I'm okay with leaving Proposition G out.
Okay. Councilman Simpson, where are we heading with your concern? It's a very valid concern. I just don't, I'm trying not to consider May as an option. And let's look at November as we need to do this. We've put in the work. What's the smartest maneuver here with getting everything we need done by November?
Well, so just to be clear, where we are right now, that is, if leaving G off, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 measures.
4 if we combine. Is it E and D?
If we strike E.
Strike
Yeah, if
E
we
and
strike
leave.
E.
So D speaks to E. So are we down to 4 now? Is that correct?
Yes.
Plus the sanctuary city. So you'd have 5 measures, which going back to what you had said, 3 easy, but 4 you can get to maybe 5.
There's 7 currently, so if you strike 2, there would be 5.
Well, I think that's correct because we're keeping the vacancy. So yes, you'd have 6, including sanctuary city, unless we were willing to lose the Prop G.
I think I would be fine with those at this point. Again, I'm just trying to catch up with new information today because I was not, I was coming, I thought that these could be possibly put together, but now I'm finding out probably not the best legal way to do it. So.
Right, and I think the struggle is this is not a simple deal. There's state statute, there's state law, there's procedural issues. So once again, we're going to run this city like a business, but without the abilities to be business-like at sometimes, to have to be government-like, and this is where we are. So, man, I remember my oldest daughter. She'd come running in the kitchen and. It's breakfast time. Like, Daddy, I want 6 waffles. 6 waffles? You want 6 Eggos? Like, I'm not cooking you 6 waffles. How about 1? And so like, man, those waffles are good. She wanted them all, But like, so yeah, for our citizens and our voters, man, I think it's like, I want all 6. Give me all 6. Well, can we sit down and eat them? Is this, and are we taking things kind of one at a time? Do we know what we're digesting? And you've seen government do this to you where they put so much in front of you so fast because they think that you will get tired. You just start clicking yes. Well, I think an untrusting community, as we see the world work within the government system that has grown and has continued to kind of take ground, the natural tendency is, whoa, I'm not comfortable, so I'm going to start clicking no. And so we don't want our voters to feel that fatigue, and there may be some wisdom in 1 waffle. So maybe we could get 5 here. Councilman Kraft, you'd like to see it on there. I know Councilman Sherlin would like to see it as well. I hadn't formally made a motion, and I want to leave that open before we try to get a second. We're not totally there, but we need to get there, and we got a few other things we're going to do here today. So,
Well, I think we're in agreement to strike E, correct? Because legally, we've got the combination in the other. Is that where we are?
can we say strike E with the language from the proposition being added to the measure? Do we need to add that language? Well,
Right.
The proposition says with terms staggered as established.
E does.
No, I'm sorry. Nope, go back up to, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
So if you go to D on the measure, should we move to put that language in there just for clarification, Mr. Hyde?
So that it matches.
Yeah, the language on D already includes with terms staggered established by ordinance.
Okay, so we're good then.
So you would just strike E altogether.
So measure
Okay.
E and Prop E? Or-
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll make a motion to strike measure E and Prop E.
So, Mr. Hyde and Mr. City Attorney, do we want to try to formulate one motion and a second with all potential changes, or do you guys want to go with certain amendments based on different motions?
I find it more clarifying that you take one at a time, but I'll defer
Okay.
to Brian with regards to if there's any other limitations.
Okay. Well then, great, thank you. So I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second to strike measure and proposition E as stated on this ordinance. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we will strike measure E. That clears up some language. I would like to put forth a motion to move measure B and prop B now down to measure E that was struck. That would then move it up to D, and it would be B, C, and D. So it would actually be D. So let me clarify that motion. Okay, I recall my motion. I know. These are just black letters on paper. Okay, I would like to make a motion to relocate or move measure B down to what will be measure D after moving the other two up.
Clarify which measure, read out the measure you want B to be after. Maybe that would make sure.
Right.
Okay, so I'll clarify one more time.
Maybe refer to recall instead of the letter.
Yes, okay. So I would move to relocate the recall process measure to follow behind the extension of council term measure. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that one passes. So now we're moving those in order. Now we are going to come down to what used to be measure F will move up, which is the vacancies, and I don't think we have any choice on that. Are we good with that, council? Okay, so we'll leave that one in, and then do I hear a motion as it refers to measure G? I know that's a tough one to jump out on. And I'm gonna move to strike measure G with a commitment from this council that we would bring it back at the next available opportunity to amend the charter.
Mayor, if you would prefer, you could move to postpone G until the next
available charter
until
amendment.
next charter election, and then it would be on the table, so to speak, for that council when the next one is item for them to consider it for. It would remain on the table for the city council.
If, for argument's sake, that council were to forget that it was sitting on the table, does that matter to you in a legal sense?
Well, it wouldn't be nice, but I don't know that there's any legal ramification or penalty.
All right.
From
So I'm going to take some wise counsel on this one. I definitely would rather move to postpone it, and I think since I now know that's a possibility, I'm going to make a motion to postpone Measure G for adding the residency requirements to the next available charter amendment.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. I would definitely allow for discussion on this one. Anyone want to talk us out of that?
Just final thoughts. I mean, I don't see the neglect in not putting it on the ballot. I mean, I think if we're worried about voter burnout, to me, it's their voice to make it heard. So I really don't see the issue of not putting it on the ballot.
Do I have anything from the right side of the table who wants to comment on this one? Okay. My only argument in this, and we'll vote, would just be there's so much wisdom in moving incrementally. And I definitely hear what you're saying, and I don't want to only consider voter fatigue or putting it on the ballot, but this is a very, very large target for opponents to shoot at. And it's going to be very costly. So in the wisdom of counting the cost up front, you're going to take 1,000,001 emails. There's going to be lots of public comment. There's going to be pushback from kind of a side that has had the luxury of a lot of control. And we are moving incrementally. We are moving in the right direction for the voter. I think the voter will see that, even though they didn't get everything. So this is calling a run up the middle there, Jimmy Joe. We need 3 yards. Like, I love the deep ball. Let's throw it in the end zone. But, like, you don't always complete that pass. And so, man, I'm calling the play here for, handing the ball off. And it wins games. So that's my argument of it. With no further discussion, I'm going to call a vote. I respect you guys for voting whichever way you'd like to. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. So, Mr. Attorney, do you have anything that you need further?
I think we've got everything we need to, and we would need you to adopt the ordinance as modified.
Yeah, so we would need one more motion and a second to adopt this ordinance as modified, and then we will bring it back for a second reading.
Correct, and those changes will be made in the process so that on the second reading, it'll be approved to form.
Okay. Ask for a motion from a councilman.
I move to adopt ordinance number 8144 as modified.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance 8144. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great work, gentlemen. Really appreciate the discussion. Thank you to our consultants, and thank you to every citizen that participated, and we will continue to move this ball forward. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we need to move to adjourn. Can I get a motion to adjourn this one?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second. We're adjourned from our specially called agenda item. I'm going to immediately here call us back into session here for our discussion on the rest of what will be fleet. We're going to take a 10-minute break. It's 10:10. We'll be back in here at 10:20 to start our fleet discussion, and then we're going to try to get CIP done before lunch. Thank y'all. We are not going to jump into fleet, as we had said earlier. I had skipped over our AEDC piece that was noticed to us yesterday, and so we have Mr. Kevin Carter here and old Doug Nelson here to run us through the AEDC budget. And Mrs. Storrs, do you need anything before we kick it off?
No, sir. Other than at your seats, there should be 2 packets of information related to AEDC. If y'all want to start there, then
we will gladly
go
start
back
there.
to city stuff afterwards.
Yeah. So, Mr. Carter, if you want to tell us how you're doing over there and what you're working on.
Well, good morning, Mayor, Council. Thank you for having us here. This is our second year presenting the budget in the way with the city software, and so I think that's worked out great. I know last year we had a few glitches, but I think this year we've worked that out. So you have 2 documents in front of you. One of those is with the city software, and then the other is the AEDC budget that was presented to the board that was approved last month at our board meeting on July 25th, I believe. That's probably not right, but sometime in July. You want me to go over the numbers, or how do you want me to handle this, Mayor?
Man, that's a good question. So I'll tell you what Mrs. Storrs usually does is she'll hit the highlights and kind of the gross. Here's how much we have in reserves. Here's our outlay, and then council can then kind of dig into what's this fee here? What are we leaving that there for?
Okay. So this year we didn't change a whole lot with there. Is it okay? Now it's on. We didn't change a whole lot. You can see from the 2023 budget and total revenues, we're projecting a little bit of increase in revenue, and that has to do with interest being so much more than it has been in the past. So we're projecting about $3.2 million in total revenue. That's on the operations side. We're projecting a $25 million revenue and sales tax. We kept that fairly flat. Of that, 12% goes to operations, and 88% of that goes to our project fund. Then in our expenditures, really the only increase that we have in expenditures in our operations is about 4%. 2% of that is in employee increases for cost of living, and then around 2% extra that we got hit with on benefits, and I think that's mostly related to the cost of the TMRS retirement as it relates to the cost of living adjustments that council was gracious enough to give the retirees. And so that's the majority of the increase in cost. Everything else we left flat on the operations budget. And then in our expenditures on our project income, we did increase that budget by $200,000. As it relates, we put the Enterprise Challenge Fund back to $500,000 from the $300,000 that we had it last year. So that makes it $575,000 instead of $375. $580, excuse me. And then our TPRDC contractual amount, that's the same. That's a pass-through. That's a 504 program that Doug and Andy run. That's in-house. They split. All of Andy's salary comes out of this TPRDC, and 40% of Doug's salary comes out of the TPRDC unit. And then all the expenses go through AEDC, and then they write us a check at the end of the year for all those past-through expenses.
Tell us what TPRDC stands for and what that is.
Texas Panhandle Regional Development Corporation. It's the 504 program that's administered by the Small Business Administration. So it's a federal government program.
Okay. So we see your contract there. Those revenues are coming from the EDC? Or those revenues?
The revenues go to the EDC.
They're coming from
TPRDC to the EDC.
Where are the revenues coming
from? So they generate revenue they do loans, small businesses all across the state, and I guess you can do them across the nation, but mostly they're in state. And so it comes from the revenue that they make off of those loans.
So if I'm looking at that back page, it says page 3 on it. Yeah,
That's correct.
We're looking
Yes,
at
sir.
$237,000 in your total revenues.
For TPRDC, that's
Those
correct.
revenues are derived from loans that you're making to small businesses.
That's correct. The interest off those loans.
Okay, so that's all interest earnings off of the loans. Oh, fees.
Yeah, fees off the loans.
And the criteria is all small business.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then a portion of your salary and another individual comes down there, and you guys basically are kind of at a wash at the end of the year.
That's correct.
It's absolute pass-through.
So
So
it's
whatever they
pass-through.
spend, they reimburse the AEDC.
Why is it set up that way? Is there some legal requirements on how you loan and where you charge as an EDC?
No. So the primary reason it's set up that way is because historically, as staff, we have done work for the entity that we are affiliated with. So I do work for Amarillo Economic Development Corporation, and then a small portion of my time is spent with Texas Panhandle Regional Development Corporation. So that is the reason that it's not a standalone entity, is because over the last, well, since 1997, whoever we've been affiliated with, I've done work for both organizations. So that's the reason.
Okay, I appreciate the explanation on that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I don't think that we've ever gone into that explanation before, so.
Well, gentlemen, do y'all have some questions for our economic development directors here?
Kevin, you and I have been working together for what we just established about a year now for the signs for Amarillo. Where, and I know if the board approves it, I think we've passed the design phase, we're in good shape. Where would that come out of?
So what would happen is we would have to do a budget amendment to either this year's current budget that we're in, not the one that we're talking about today. We could split it between those two budgets. It would still have to be a budget amendment in both of those budgets, so it'd be probably easier to just to do it out of the one that's currently. But it would be a budget amendment, and it would just, we would make it as part of the marketing support. We would just do a budget amendment for that marketing support.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Is that good business practice, pretty typical the way you always do with us? You know, you would bring forth a budget amendment if you were taking something out of that marketing amount?
We've only done that twice. We did it once during COVID when we did our Amarillo's Open category, because typically we just don't go over budget. So, but with a special project, then we would have to take that budget amendment or the item, and it would have to do a budget amendment with our board, and then we would bring that to council as well for y'all to approve that budget amendment as well.
So we would oversee any of those special items that would come through your EDC fund, maybe out of budget. So if
we're required by law to bring that to our board and to you. So
Okay.
you have to approve that budget amendment if it goes,
So council-
especially a significant item like that.
council get an opportunity to be for or against anything that you're doing like that.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I don't know. I don't look left and right like you're surprised it went this well. You're just going to get up.
Well,
and
we're
walk
not through
out.
yet, so.
Keep going. Hit the other highlights that you have for us, and then we'll wrap up our questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely. In the sheet that's got Amarillo Economic Development, not in the city, you can see kind of historically what's happened over the last few years. We are asking for, it's around $260,000 compared to last year, and then about $500,000 less than we asked for in 2022 and 2023. The reason for the increase, like I said, the two main items is the $200,000 back in the Enterprise Challenge, and then the excess cost of the retirement and the 2% cost of living adjustment for employees. That does not include me. So.
Just to take an opportunity, we do this sometimes with other departments and kind of, well, I know we're working on this. Let's bring our public up to speed on it. And also let's make sure council knows kind of next steps. So if you would, can you give us the consultant's name that you've got hired, a quick update on the consultant, and then the intentions of bringing them in for that strategic business plan citywide, and also this board's willingness to sit back down with your board to look at maybe some additions and a few other changes.
Yeah, absolutely. We, at y'all's direction, we hired Next Move Group to come in and do a strategic plan for us. They've come in and done the initial site visit on site, met with me solely, and then met with our staff without me. And then we have given them 10 names. Actually, it's 11 names that they have contacted. I think almost everybody's completed theirs. I know that you scheduled yours, Mayor, but it includes the mayor, our chair of the board, and then 9 community leaders that will be interviewed. And then we will come together, and sometime in September is the plan for the 5 of our board members and the 5 of y'all to meet, kind of get y'all's perspective at that time in the same room, and then they'll formulate that plan within 30 days of that joint meeting. Really excited about hearing what the outtake is. You know, I think that we did a pretty good diverse group with the 9 community leaders beside the mayor and our chair. And so really interested to hear what people's perspective is as we move forward. And, you know, it may tell us that, hey, we need to focus on this industry sector that we haven't been focused on, or something that we have been focused on. Maybe we need to, you know, not focus on that. So it'll be interesting to hear their perspective when you take somebody from the outside looking in instead of, you know, all of us looking from the inside.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you for that update. And you've given them good direction to kind of be twofold in what they're looking. They're looking for industry that we should be targeting and looking towards, but they're basing that based on, well, here's your natural resources. Here's what you have to offer that sets you apart from other cities or geographical areas. So with that, will they bring a good consideration and kind of a comprehensive eval of existing infrastructure, existing capabilities, everything from water to land?
I'm not sure. We did go look at all the land that we owned in the area. They did look at some of the businesses that are already located here, and then they drove around for a day by themselves. So I'm not sure what they looked at. I don't know that they'll give us a total take. I don't know that we're diving in that deep as far as what our infrastructure looks like from a city standpoint. I mean, obviously, the business parks that we have, of course, South Georgia and Centerport are very well. The infrastructure in there is great, probably as good as anybody has in the country. I think that they will look at that, and there's also 5 or 6 things that doesn't have to do with industry sector that you guys had asked for when we met last time I think we were in room downstairs maybe, when we met jointly. There were about 6 or 8 things that I made notes of that you guys had requested, and so I gave them that list to look at, and so that may be some of the questions. I don't know if you've had your interview yet, Mayor, so you may probably have a better idea of what kind of questions they ask you. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what questions they ask. Well, I don't think I got the same questions as the members of the public.
Hopefully next week. This week's been taken up with budget, but Mr. Path, just for you, you'll get to be at those next meetings, and you'll get to key in. You'll get to be a key role with your previous experience and some of your expertise in EDC and development. And then infrastructure on our side, one big communication piece is being able to map and lay out, like, look, this is how many MGDs we can run right here. And then we've got to build a new plant. So if you bring us an industry that is going to require a new plant, what do we have on our sales force team that says, look, that's not a problem because we have this, or we know this will take place in the next 5 years. And so a lot of these business plans are 5-year build-outs anyway. And so, like, those are the proactive, forward-looking steps that we're going to take, and we look forward to having you involved in that and you being the lead on really bringing those key infrastructure pieces in along with Floyd. So that helps me kind of catch up on that. Any hindrances, anything that's not happening over there that you want to see?
I don't think so. No, I think it's really an exciting time. We're still very busy with what we're doing. A lot of the things that we're seeing is mainly distribution right now. Not a lot of people are wanting to spend $1 billion at 8% money, but we're seeing a good amount of interest in distribution. I know y'all had just approved a sale of land. we're working on getting that closed. They want to close really quickly. That's going to be a great project. That's $13 million to Indries Express. They're going to put a cheese aging and cold storage in. You know, it's small employment number, 4 people, but you know, that's a good number. They're going to pay really well. They're not a large water user, a large wastewater user, which makes Floyd happy to my left. So I know that. So and so we're really excited about those kind of projects. They just keep coming, and you know, we're going to keep selling Amarillo. We've got a great product to sell, and so you know, that's what we're going to keep doing.
Good deal. Well, you got a great sales team. I don't think anybody has faulted you on not selling enough. I think, if anything, you guys are running fast, and we want to make sure we can keep up. So, man, really good. Do I have any other questions from council? Yes, sir.
Just one thing anecdotally. I submitted my daughter, son-in-law, and grandson's address for the reroute program, and that you got an A+ on your swag. I'm told.
Yeah, isn't it? It's really incredible.
Yeah, so they were
hats
impressed
off
with
to
that.
our team on that.
But unfortunately, they're moving to North Carolina. So, you know, but not your fault. He does something that there's not a job here for him to do, which is a Division I coach. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. And I think there was a nice handwritten note in there. And so appreciate that program. And hopefully people will continue to try to bring their grandchildren back home.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Councilmember Simpson. I think the reroute, the take route and the reroute, that's been a great kickoff. We sent out close to 30 boxes last month of people's names that have been submitted to get their kids and grandkids and, you know, nephews and nieces, get some of our young professionals that went off and to get them back and to contribute. They know that this is, you know, they grew up here. This is a great place to raise a family, and they want to come back and do that. So hopefully this will be very successful. The kickoff was successful. We just hope the results will be, but I appreciate the good comments. Thank you.
Anything on this side? Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. We'll see you real soon at our next joint meeting. Thank you. Ms. Storrs, what do you got cooking next?
All right, next we're going to go to Fleet. So we'll bring back, oh, I'm sorry, Donnie. It's going to be the Donnie show again. So if you want to start, we can turn to page 289 in your books when y'all get a chance. Be safe. Yes, 289.
Ms. Storrs, Councilman Tips was talking the entire time. You gave me that page again. Would you repeat that one more time?
Sure, 289.
289.
Yes. So while y'all are turning to that page, I'm going to just real quickly walk you through some of the assumptions that we had on we have built into this budget for Fleet this year, and then we're going to talk about some other options. So if you remember on Tuesday, I know that feels like 2 weeks ago probably at this point, because we've had it's been a lot of information this week, but on Tuesday we had gone over the cash flows for our Fleet Services Fund. Fleet Services is an internal service fund, so that means that they are only in existence to serve the other city departments. So they take care of all of our equipment, our vehicles, not all of it, but most of our equipment and our vehicles. And they charge an operating rate to all of the departments that covers fuel, it covers maintenance costs, repairs, those kind of things. And they also charge a replacement cost to our departments. The idea of it is it's really managed all kind of in one place. We have one group that's overseeing it, that's helping make decisions about it, ensuring we're being as efficient as we can with our equipment. However, we've definitely had some challenges over the years. And Donnie will probably jump into this a little bit, but I can certainly go ahead and lead us off with this. We'll go as far back as like a decade and a half. So if you go back to about 2007 or so, when there were some challenging economic conditions going on, City Council had some tough decisions to make. There were some budget constraints in those years. I think it was the 07-08 year. And so one of the decisions was we're going to pull back on some of our fleet funding. because we need to be able to support, just our general operations. And so by doing that, that obviously set us back a little bit. Well, we did start moving forward after that with increases to the contributing funds year over year over year, but never at a fast enough pace or at an amount high enough in order to get fleet back to where they truly were funded in a way that they could replace all the vehicles and equipment on time based on their useful lives. So what that has done over the years is it has made us stretch the life of those vehicles and equipment much, much further than they should be, which also means we're putting a lot more money into repairs and maintenance on our fleet. It's just where we are. I will tell you, in a lot of years, the constraints on the fleet services fund really was based on what general fund could afford. And as you know, general fund is probably where we have some of the largest funding challenges. And so it was kind of, what can general fund afford? That's what we'll do as an increase for fleet. We've done everything from 1% increases to maybe 5% increases. But Donnie can probably tell us the historical rate increases that we've seen on just replacement of vehicles. I mean, we've probably been up in like 30, 40, 50% increases to the cost of replacing some of those. So we're behind. So last year when we met with you all, we were very upfront of, we have $5 million to replace probably, I don't remember the number, Donnie, 19 million in capital, something like that?
It's right about 18 million.
About 18 million?
Yeah,
okay.
close to that.
So we knew we were not funding it appropriately, and so we needed to start exploring some other options. So your budget that you have before you here, the biggest factors influencing this budget is you still have increased fuel costs, right? So all your fuel costs for the vast majority of your entire city are held inside this fund, and they're charging out a rate to departments. So fuel costs continue to rise. Parts are still expensive, and we've got a very old fleet. So we are trying to maintain them and fix them a lot more. Those are your biggest things. We did do a rate increase to all departments of 3%. And that's just what's built in for now. And so with 3%, as you know, we've presented a balanced budget, so everybody can afford it. It's in there that way. That is going to produce $8 million for replacement of vehicles and equipment for next year. Donnie, what do we need for next year to replace? Do you have that number handy?
I do. That was the number I just mentioned. So the 18 million is what we did not replace this year, but you still have to add that to the number for what we need to replace next year as well.
So what did we need to replace next year plus the 18 million from this year? Do you have that handy?
Yeah. So next year, total cost to fund the fleet, and that would be in the enterprise funds and the general fund, was 9.7 added on to that 18 million.
Okay.
That would bring us current in the up and coming budget if we were to bring the fleet back to where it needs to be.
And that is replacing all vehicles and equipment that have hit their estimated useful life?
And I would say that's probably being nice. I think it's far exceeded its useful life. And I can talk about that a little bit in a moment, too.
Absolutely. And I think Donnie can bring some light to maybe how long, we're making our police cars last, how long we're making just an average, vehicle last. I mean, we're stretching them to the limits. So did you have a question?
Yeah,
go ahead.
So you said that 3% increase in fuel, that's going to generate $8 million?
No. So the 3% that's going across the departments is allowing, that's a 3% rate increase to the operating piece that they're paying for, which is covering the increased fuel costs. And then it's allowing us to take that $5 million and basically grow it up to about $8 million. So we were able to replace $5 million last year. We're able to replace $8 million in this.
So it's not an $8 million increase.
No.
It's total of $8.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's a good point. So it's really a $3 million increase from what we had in the current year. Good question on that. Yes, please.
All that's built into your current budget?
That's correct. Yeah, that's how it's built right now.
So you're giving us our current proposed?
Yes.
And then still asking for additional?
So we're going to talk through some options, and I have probably stole more than my fair share of Donnie's thunder here, because he is going to have a lot of information to update you all on. And so I just kind of wanted to give you the big picture, and then we've got options. And I think that was one thing that you all tasked us with last year is, okay, well, if this thing is broken, how do we fix it? And so we have been talking through ideas. We've been trying out a couple of things. And so I will punt it over to Donnie now, and I'll probably jump in on a couple little things. Unless, did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, I do. You just arbitrarily charged every department 3%.
Yeah, we increased what they were already paying by 3%. Yes.
Now, my question is, why don't we charge the department by what they actually use of that budget? I mean, for instance, the landfill's going to use a large portion of that, so they would need to pay a higher percentage than 3%, and then maybe somebody else doesn't need but 1%.
As much. I think that is an excellent point. We have worked over the years to ensure that especially the enterprise funds are covering more of their full cost. The challenge is your general fund. I'll let Donnie talk to maybe, I think police is probably a really good place to kind of talk. They, obviously in their line of work, there's a lot of accidents in those vehicles, right? Which creates a lot of repair and maintenance costs to those vehicles. They get a lot of wear and tear. They get in a lot of wrecks, and those historically have not been costs that the general fund can incur on their own. So we have spread it around amongst all of the supporting departments. Does that make sense? Not saying it's a way of doing it. I'm not saying it's the best way of doing it. It's just the way we've kind of done it. So I think let me hand it over to Donnie now and let him kind of give you a little more insight on this.
Yeah, and I think that was a great introduction, Laura, to the historical things, because we have been fighting an uphill battle in fleet. And to answer your question about increases in cost of it's just like everything else. 2021 to current, we've seen about a 30% increase in the cost of vehicles. Now, you go back prior to that, there was 10 years before that, you were seeing 1 to 2% increases per year. But just over the past 3 years, we've seen significant increases, mostly due to COVID and supply chain shortages and things like that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of more data and more information and kind of where we arrived at this conversation today. I hear the term all the time, we run this like a business, and that's one thing that we do in fleet is we try to do that. We look at a lot of things when we determine a useful life of a vehicle. Our break-even point, when we want to determine when maintenance costs start to exceed the cost of acquiring a new vehicle, our total cost of ownership analysis, we try to evaluate there the total cost of owning that vehicle over its life, including the purchase price, the maintenance, the fuel, insurance, depreciation, all those things. Also, repair costs, track and maintenance of repair costs. Really, if you look at the industry standard, it's about a 30%. When you reach a 30% of the original cost of that vehicle in maintenance, it's time for it to go. 30% is about the number, and that's high in some cases. Some people use 25%. If you talk to some of the major leasing companies like Avis and places like that, maybe even less than that. But municipalities, 25 to 30% is a good number to go by. So remember that number, because in a minute I'll blow your mind a little bit. In fact, I'll do it now. Trash trucks are a great example. We have an 8-year replacement schedule on our trash trucks right now. And this is just one example of many that we could give you throughout the fleet. That should be about a 6-year life cycle on trash trucks. It's one of the things that Laura talked about, having to extend the life of those due to budgetary constraints. So we're using an 8-year replacement schedule now. To give you some reality on that, though, we have 8 2016 trash trucks that were not replaced this year. So those are 8 years old. I took a random sample from that group. In fact, got those numbers. I wanted to be updated as of this morning. The original cost of those 2016 trash trucks was $142,000. They now are $200,000 to purchase one of those. So $142,000, if you take the maintenance that we've spent on that, we should be, that 30% number should be about $50,000, where it would become time to replace that vehicle. We've spent $235,000 on the one truck that I pulled in a sample just in maintenance. Now, that's overall cost of ownership. That includes your changing of your tires, your fuel, everything that goes along with that. Just $152,000 alone were in parts, and that's not labor included in that. And that's just one sample. So that I said, all right, well, let's take the 8 2016 trucks that did not get replaced this year, and let's do an average of what that cost is. And it's about $210,000 in maintenance per truck. So we're well over the threshold of we're spending more money on them than it would be if we would replace those. And this is pretty typical in our fleet. We have police units out there that have over 175,000 miles on that. Now, a lot of that was due to the supply chain issues with units that we ordered in 21 that we didn't get in 22. We didn't get them in 23, and they're finally coming in now. But there's been an increased cost in those over what the cost was in 2021. So that's just an example of some of the things. The average of our fleet, if you look across the entire fleet, is 18 years. And that's a pretty unacceptable number in industry standards. And that includes 1,157 units. We have 600 units that are outside of the fleet. And that's the way that happens is, and we call that fleet creep, and most of the industry does that as well, and it's because those outdated pieces of equipment, they're ready to go to auction, but there's another department that has either grown, expanded, needed another vehicle, and they said, hey, we don't have money in our budget, but we need to go and expand. We've got to have a pickup truck. What do you have coming out of service? So they're getting a new vehicle in their department that has 180,000 miles on it that the maintenance costs are extremely high on it. There's really no way around doing that, and it's something that it's not a good business model to do it that way, but that's what we've had to do due to the funding that we've had in our fleet. So again, we have just an example of today. I ran the report. We get these daily reports, and I'm using solid waste because it's a great example of something that we deal with. Those are high maintenance vehicles. They take a lot of abuse when they're in the alleys, but we have 18 trash trucks that are down today as of this morning. That's a pretty, we run 10 to 12, 14, 16, 18 is a pretty high number today, but that leaves us with 10 open routes to service today, which means that we've got employees that are going to be staying late tonight, probably till about 7 o'clock on a Friday night, to take all those extra routes and finish those. This is something that we've learned to deal with and we've learned to handle. And it's why these discussions have started where we said we've got to start doing something, start looking at other options, try to figure out something to right-size this fleet, because fiscally, I don't think it's responsible for us to be spending that much on maintenance, running old vehicles, and et cetera. Some of it we can't help. We also did a look 5 years ahead to determine what the needs would be, not only with what we didn't fund this year, what we expect or what we need to fund next year, but then over the next 4 years past that, so we could get a good look at, what we fund this year is not going to fund the needs of the replacements for next year, if that makes sense. So we also ran some leasing models, and we ran those on our white fleet. Our white fleet would consist of police cars, pickup trucks, sedans, service body trucks that you would use, that you see a pickup truck that's like a 1-ton truck with a service body on it. Those are the things that we can lease. Outside of that, we have things that we would have to purchase, such as dump trucks, trash trucks, vectors, all those big pieces of heavy equipment that have a cash cost associated with those. Now, some of those we can lease, like we do lease at the landfill, our scrapers and our compactor. But just in the fleet itself, a lot of those. So after looking at all that and looking at that 5-year number, it comes out to be about $66 million worth of equipment to right-size the fleet if we spent everything that we need to do as far as purchasing all of that equipment, about $13 million per year. On the leasing models of that, it's a lot less than that. And I wished I could have provided you with some data, some spreadsheets and all that, but the spreadsheets that I have that are just on the fleet analysis are so big that we would spend the entire day looking through those. So just in summary, and give you a good example of what leasing does for us, we talked about the general fund numbers and just staying in the general fund. If we were to purchase everything this year and next year that we need to do just in the general fund, that's about $19 million. $12 million this year, $7 million next year. Remember the number I gave you a moment ago was for the entire fleet. That's just in the general fund. If we were to lease the equipment that we could lease in that, you're talking about $1.1 million in 23, and the stuff we didn't purchase this year, and about $888,000 for next year. And then we would have to outright purchase equipment of $10 million and $6 million, so $16 million worth of purchases. So it helps us a little bit in the white fleet, but it doesn't help us in the capital that we have to have with heavy equipment and those large equipment purchases that we have to have. So you can sit here and tear these numbers apart and look at them in all different ways, but we still have to have a pretty large number. I might mention, too, that Chief Kuba is back there in the back, too. We've been working with him. They've been working separately in the fire department, looking at ways that, because all that stuff is purchased out of fleet as well, on how they could lease engines and ladder trucks. They've got a very good plan that they put together that was a 10-year plan, if I remember correct, or maybe a 20-year plan. Okay, yeah, it extended way out, well past our 5-year analysis. So, but they did a fantastic job on their plan. We've been working with them as well. Now, their leasing options are with companies that do nothing but fire trucks. And I'll give you a good example of that. You know, they had some leasing numbers that would go into the 25-26 fiscal year. That'd be about $2.1 million added to what we would need to expend that year. And that included equipment that was well up into the, you know, just a ladder truck alone is well over $2 million now. Yeah. Yeah. So, and their plan is added into the leasing plan that we have as well. So the leasing totals, if you look that up, and I know this is a lot of numbers to absorb, but I just took a 5-year total of leasing the white fleet along with the fire trucks, and that's about $7.1 million that we would need over that 5-year period, including the stuff that we didn't purchase this year. And then you got the numbers outside of that you would still have to purchase. So either way that you look at this, it's a large sum of money to swallow and try to figure out what we need to do with it and how we need to approach this. I think we have a plan figured out, and I think we have a way that we can tackle it, but it takes funding to do that, and that's the issue. That's pretty much what I want to talk about. Now, we can dive into the numbers, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. We also have, you know, water and sewer to discuss, as well as drainage utility, and I think we have a way that we can fund. Drainage utility does not, since it's such a new department, it was founded in 2012, we're pretty good on equipment there. It's probably the least amount of cash that we would have to have, and I think we could take the drainage piece out of that because I think we can handle that with some of the numbers that we discussed yesterday in our capital plan, and that $4.5 million. Some of that includes that equipment that we need in drainage, but you still have water and sewer that you have to discuss as well. A good example, last thing I'll leave you with, just our F-150 pickups that did not get purchased this year that were needing to be replaced and are well beyond their expected life. I think that number was 49 of those pickups across the entire city, and that's across all departments, enterprise and general fund. So with that said, wipe the sweat off, and we'll lay that in your lap and try to figure out what we need to do moving forward, at least with the plan.
So within the plan, would it be debt issuance as what would be paying the lease?
We talked about that, but go ahead, Laura.
So, and I think that's a great point to bring up. So that is another tool that we have available, is to do some sort of a recurring debt issuance to get us a little bit more, or to stretch the dollars a little bit further. You know, we had also talked about it as an option to free up some cash in the general fund, but I think you could see that if we keep moving forward with the path that we're on, we're just going to keep falling further and further behind. So we did run some numbers from a debt standpoint. So this is just kind of looking at the general fund, if we can just talk about that for a second. So I had them run if we did an ongoing tax note issuance program. So tax notes are 7 years, which is closer to the life of those vehicles and equipment. And so that would match it pretty good. So I said, well, what if we were to issue $8 million in debt each year and grow that at 3% annually? So it goes from 8 million to 8.2 to 8.5 each year. Does that make sense? On the amount that we would get, we would be able to buy. So what that would do in turn is you would have an annual debt service payment that starts at about $5.5 million. So you would be about 2.5 to the good, right? So that money then potentially could go over and help do some leasing for maybe like the white fleet is what it's referred to, or the fire trucks.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right.
I think the trash trucks would be in the heavy equipment you'd have to purchase with those.
Okay.
Funds, yeah.
So maybe white fleet and fire trucks would be leasing, and then pretty much everything else would be through. But again, this is only $8 million. And how much was in the general fund of just equipment that needed to be purchased?
Outside of the lease?
Yes.
Just over, a total over the 5-year period, or?
What we would need to do like next year? Year one.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
That would be $8 million for the current year that we're in now, plus 4 would be 12.
Okay, so we'd be about 4 short. This is just one model here. Yes, but together 12. So if we only did 8 next year, we'd be 4 short.
Which is still better than where we're at now.
Totally agree. Completely agree. So as I mentioned earlier, so the rate is set up where part's for operating and part is for replacement, right? So, and it's almost, I mean, not exactly, but almost split completely down the middle. So right now, what's built into your budget for general fund is about $17.8 million for fleet funding. So if you split that thing right down the middle, you're at $8.9 million. And so you would have about $3.5 million that you could use towards like leasing options, get $8 million in debt. But that's year one. The way this program would work is your debt service would start at about 5.5. It would go up to about 7.5 by the 7th year. So once you get the full, it kind of steps up because you're doing a debt issuance every single year. And so you're still paying debt service on one, and then you start the next one, you're doing debt service. So it starts at $5.5 million and steps up to $7.5 million over that, I guess, 7-year period. Or I think that's by year 8. So you would have the 2.5 for this year, but we would have to, again, that's still not getting everything, but that's getting a lot more than what we're getting right now.
It is, and if I could add something
Yeah,
to
please.
that, one of the things that I've noticed that would be a benefit of moving some of that the white fleet to a leasing program is that we would have them come in, and we've already had this discussion with D&M, who we're currently leasing some equipment from. We would have them come in, meet with the departments, which would include directors, assistant directors, and superintendents of those departments, and start asking the question of, why do we need an F-150 to do this type of work? You may need something that is of a lesser model, like a Ford Taurus or something like that, because I think that there's significant savings that we could see in that if we have a true analysis, department by department, of why we have the equipment that we have and if it's truly needed. Now, some of it certainly is, but they may not need a 4-wheel drive in that model. They may just need a 2-wheel drive. And I think we could see some savings there that would help us with that bottom line number of the lease as well.
So just kind of brainstorming here, I mean, if this was something that council was willing to look at, here's the risk in it, though. If you start on a program like this, you would, okay, so right now we're paying cash, and that's on your O&M side of your rate, correct? If you do a debt issuance for this, it's going to flip to the other side of your tax rate, okay? So now it's on your INS side of your tax rate, which you could do a couple of things with that. You could bring down your O&M side of your tax rate, knowing your INS comes up, right, and have no tax increase, right, for this. You could do whatever you wanted to because you'd have that wiggle room on your O&M side. But here's kind of where I guess the risk in this is a little bit is at this point, now I know there was a meeting earlier today to take some changes potentially to the voters at the election, but for now, we have council elections every 2 years for every single position. This is a program that we would need to start and we would need to continue for a 7-year period. Year 8, your year 1 debt starts rolling off and you've got the tax rate in place to go ahead and issue the next debt without affecting any tax rate. You would have to try to start aligning all of your replacement of everything on a 7-year period. Does that make sense? So right now we're stretching things 10, 15, 20 years. So, I mean, we could build into this, but I think it would take commitments from councils year after year after year. And the way that this is kind of priced out to do it over this 7-year period, we would need to continue to do some step-up funding into fleet out of general fund to ensure we could, have the rate appropriate to pay for this debt service. So I think there's options. I don't know that it completely fixes everything, but this is something, if you did some leasing and you did some debt issuances for the purchasing, you would make a bigger you would make more progress on this fleet fund than it's probably seen in a few decades.
And it would also give us the option to, and Jason Jupe, who's our superintendent of the fleet services, we were talking about this week, and it also would give him the opportunity at that point in time to say, okay, let's scrutinize this a little bit closer now. Do we really need to replace this vehicle that may have 10 years of life on it, but it's only got 40,000 miles on it because its usage is a lot smaller? Can we split that between some other departments? It kind of gives some flexibility to us to not just say, okay, well, it's 8 years, let's replace it. Does that make sense? I think we could take a deeper dive in saying, okay, this is what we have to work with. What's the most important pieces, which is really what they're doing now. But with the funding that we have, let's try to get it right. If we had that additional funding, I think it would, it's not going to fix it 100% complete, but I think it would be a tremendous improvement. Not only that, but with what you save in efficiencies with newer vehicles, compared to the efficiencies of a 2016 model vehicle, just the changes there alone make a huge difference in our budget. Now, the costs you got to consider are going to go up, and we don't know what that's going to be over the next 5 years, too.
Would you be willing to give a broad estimate of what you think efficiencies could hit that bottom line total? I mean, are we talking $100,000 or $1 million a year in repair savings cost, fuel efficiencies, whatever?
We could do that. It would take a little bit of time. That's one of the things that we had talked about with the leasing company was to come in. They do a model like that when they come in. If you know you're going to rewrite sizing, they can give you the numbers on. In fact, let me just answer it this way. I can make a couple of phone calls and probably get what the average is on that.
I think long term you're going to want to know that anyway, even just in messaging this and justifying it as a practice moving forward. Let's not even talk about our boss in the taxpayer. Let's talk about future council. Like, are you going to be able to sit here and say, look, future council, this is why we were comfortable knowing we could get on a 7-year plan? Because any leader that's in a leadership position is going to see the benefit here of putting us on a recycling or reciprocal turnover, and here's what your net was last year. Mm-hmm. This is what we thought it would be, but this is actually the number. So we're going to have the data to proof it up. Let me see if I can generalize a few things because I want to be able to get to the total. Did you have a total need of everything that you need in the next 5 years for all fleet?
For purchase, lease, for
millions. Purchase, total cost of purchase. Didn't have that, did you?
I do. Just in the general fund, if we were to purchase everything over that 5-year period was $55.6 million.
Okay.
If we were to purchase everything in water and sewer, it was $10.7 million. And if we were to purchase everything in drainage, it was about $1.1 million. So you're looking at about $66 million.
Okay. So we have $66 million in needs over the next 5 years. If I run your 7-year note, which I would be interested in, like, why'd you pick 7 and not 5?
So that
Is that just what the tax note is per state law?
Yes, you can go shorter, though. We absolutely could revise this, and we could do it on a 5-year. I don't have those numbers here, but
it would just mean a higher annual debt payment.
Would, yeah.
Yeah. So the 7-year has some there's some intelligence in that, in the way in which you're going to get 7 years out of those vehicles. That's about the time you want to turn them over, not the 5-year.
Well, that's a variable number. It ranges from 3 years for a police patrol car to the 6 years of a trash truck to maybe 8 years on a F-150 pickup or Silverado pickup.
So you would build in a budgetary item, a mechanism that would allow you to flow through fleet between the needs of, well, we know PD needs a little bit more turnover than we do in the building safety. Those trucks drive a little longer. Is that right?
That's correct.
Would we have any value? Well, we wouldn't have any value. If I run your $8 million on your 5.5 annual debt service, that's a little less than 70%. So what I'm saying is, for my $66 million times 70%, am I correct in pushing that number forward? If I took 66 million times 0.7, that I'd have 46.2 million in annual debt service? Not saying we would have the ability to do this in 1 year, nor that we would want to not phase it in, but I'm looking at what my total debt service is versus my net cash.
Tell me what the total number was again.
So what I did was I divided 5.5 million in your annual debt service by your borrowing power. So you said it was 8 million on that 7-year note, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So that's 68.5%, so I rounded it up to 70%.
Okay.
So based on what I could finance versus what my cash stance is, I'm netting 2.5 million in cash on the first year. I would then be, what was this number? If people would stop texting me, I could see what I'm looking at. 46.2 million, less the 66 million.
Now,
I'd have a $19.8 million cash flow if you are projecting 8 million. Now, what's our current cash outlay?
So our current cash outlay is, well, it's 17.8 million, but about half of it goes to replacement, so that's 8.9 million.
So I'm currently cash outlaying 8.9 million, and I could capture 3 million of that in year one.
Yes, we could capture about 3.4 million of that in year one. And I'm running the debt service numbers out here, and you could capture about, it's looking pretty consistent. With a 5% growth in the rate, we would be paying, you're right at about 3.5 each year, even as your debt service is escalating.
So I'm coming up with $20 million on a 5-year turnover. Well, I should say that $20 million annually at year 5. Am I saying that correctly where everyone understands? So once you ramp this up, $8 million 5 times over, well, I guess you'd have to go 7 years. Or no, you're building it in. You're building it up to that 66 million total in 5 years?
So what this would get us to no, this was just, what I had on model out was, I knew we were about 8 million-ish, and we're actually a little closer to 9 million-ish. I said, what can we do with 8 million that we've got in cash now? What kind of buying power, would that get us if we instead didn't cash flow it and we debt serviced it? Does that make sense?
It does. And Don, I don't want you to lose your question, but in the simplicity of the numbers, could you spend $10 million in leases in year one? Or is 8 million some sort of a volumized, well, this is all we could really handle in trying to get these ordered and getting them implemented?
Are you talking about the purchasing value of that lease?
Yeah, I'm looking at trying to set $10 million as a model, so that I would have $7 million in annual debt service, roughly 6.8, and I'd capture $3 million worth of cash in year one, but I would build on that every year. And then in 5 years, I would have caught up to 50 million of your 55 million worth of needs.
The problem is that there's only certain equipment that we can lease. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're going to need to have cash, but she just said 17 million she has annually budgeted, and she's only pulling out roughly 9 million in what we'll call leasable expenditures, right?
Yeah, because
we're paying cash for them.
Leasing over that 5-year period, that total, if we leased the fire equipment that they talked about in ours, it was like 7.1 million.
Over the 5 years?
Over the 5 years, including the current year we're in.
Okay, hang on.
So I'm just trying to give a general average to something that's far more complicated, because I know everything varies from fire apparatus to F-150s. But if we could confidently run a model where we know roughly 70% of our expenditures that were cash can become lease, we're netting 30% cash on those years. And then we implement a program with a 50 million outlay in 5 years. Now all you've got is roughly $16 million worth of stuff that you have in your budget in year 1 and 2. Because you have 9 million in year 1, 9 million in year 2, still currently built in your budget.
That's
so
correct.
In theory, I could free up $3 million worth of cash in year 1, and by year 3, I would free up $12 million worth of cash. And I would be somewhat caught up in theory, if we didn't have a further deterioration of equipment, or if we didn't grow or didn't need something.
So, but freeing up cash, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but the cash that we freed up, we would propose using towards the lease payments for the rest, for fire trucks and for all of the white fleet.
Okay, so I understand where you're going with it, but I'm trying to simplify it just for my model in my head.
Okay.
So what I'm taking is your total ask of $8 million. which is including your 3 million, correct? Of freed up cash?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just saying that's the total lease. So you would have a total lease value of 8 million, and I actually pushed it to 10,
Okay.
thinking that would be an easier model, looking for a $7 million lease payment annually. So in theory, once again, if we could go and lease $10 million worth of equipment through Fleet Services, we would be spending $7 million every year on annual debt payment. But we've been able to budget in all 10 million in cash outlays. Is that what's currently in here?
So cash outlays are about 9 million.
Yeah,
for
so
replacement.
so your 8 million works in your model, and so I think that's yeah, we're
Close.
So I'm not sure that I see a downside.
Okay.
Okay, so I've got to be missing something here.
No, I
So-
think you're right, Mayor. I
Okay.
think that, and the other thing is, Donnie, tell me again, how much did you say it was to replace everything that needs to be replaced over the 5-year period?
66 million.
66? I've got 77. That's my
Well,
question.
and I think that's because that's not including their numbers that they have from fire over that. That would be taking them out of the lease that they're working
You
on.
said 55.6, and then 10.7 for water and sewer, and 1.1 for drainage. Is that correct? Those numbers?
Yeah,
Well, that's
so-
77.
66.
55 million, 10 million, 66 million. It's actually like 68.
Okay, all right, yeah, okay, I got you.
A lot of numbers floating around. Not trying to muddy the water at all, but I just think as we're trying to be aggressive, all 66 million of your needs are not leasable, correct?
There's a lot of them that are not leasable.
What would you say would be the percentage of that that's not going to be leasable, or millions? Is there $20 million worth of things you're just going to need to pay cash for?
The number outside of that, well, just take the 66 minus 7.1 million, and the 7.1
really?
is what's leasable.
So,
Well, I mean, with the leasing companies that we're talking with, there's a way that we can do heavy equipment, I'm sure, if we do a little research, but it's going to be multiple leases over multiple platforms.
Say that one more time, Donnie. We need to replace 66 million and only 7.1 is leasable?
non-leasable.
7.1 is leasable.
Okay.
Oh, is leasable? I thought you said non-leasable.
No, 7.1 is leasable.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So,
So
okay,
that's
hang
the
on.
downside.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. So I thought you were giving us $55 million worth of needs, and that we could
Apologies,
lease $5.5 million worth, or $8 million worth of leases every year.
Yeah, here's I can give you this. So I've got all these numbers in front of me, and this will maybe make a little more sense of where I came up with that 7.1. This is just, we took all the white fleet, everything that we could lease, and each year broke it out. 1.1 million in current needs, 888,000 next year, 2.1 in 25-26, 1 million in 26-27, 741,000 in 27-28, and 1.1 million in 28-29.
Okay. So, man, I apologize then. I've taken us all the way down a road here with some good numbers, and it was based on the understanding that we were going to go spend $8 million in year one, and we had $8 million worth of leasable equipment you could get in year one.
Yeah, that was the total over the 5. Sorry about that.
Okay. So if we were to go that route, I almost feel like council would give a directive to staff, hey, go figure out how you lease $8 million worth of stuff that we already need. Because, like, this is a great business plan.
Well, we're so far behind that I don't know that that's out of the question. You know what I'm saying? I think we were just trying to make that where we were still not trying to impact the just 1 or 2 years of the budget with everything all at once. And I think we could do that. Come
Well,
back with that analysis.
Council, y'all weigh in and tell me if there was a way to go out and work with a leasing company that would lease heavy equipment and F-150s for us, treat us as a good customer, be able to procure these vehicles so we're not waiting years on end. But we would see the benefit, and y'all tell me if you don't, but like $8 million, with a $5.5 million annual payment, you net that $2.5 million. I think the issue here is we got a great business model. We just don't have a vehicle, literally, to get there.
In
So, like-
conversations with D&M Leasing, when we originally talked to them, the question came up about leasing trash trucks and things like that. It can be done. It's just a lot more complicated. So the answer is still they can do it, but we still have to order the chassis, lease that, come up with a component to go get the service bodies put on there. It just gets a little bit more complicated, but I'm not saying it can't be done.
What about, no, I was just thinking financially, if there was a way to work with like our own leasing, so like fleet would be the mechanism that we need to carry these leases. But you still have that third-party connection that you're going to have to use.
You do, and then there's another limitation to that as well, that when the buying windows come open, there's only a certain amount that's allocated that they can get to. So if we make that number too big, we may not be able to fulfill the order.
Yeah. So really, council would simply need this brought back, and I'll take further discussion, but we would need this brought back with, here's the reality of what we can go buy and put on a lease payment. Here's the debt service for that, and here's your net cash value.
Perfect. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to jump in real quick. I'd like to get a chance to kind of work this over myself, too, with staff, get my head wrapped around it. I know we did similar programs in Paris a little bit, so I'd like to get a chance to give it Donnie and Laura and staff to look at these numbers, look at the financing here. I was actually going to reckon the same thing when it came to our street capital. I was going to ask the council to proceed with your plan you have in street capital, but give myself and staff a chance to maybe next week to kind of sit down and let me run over the numbers with them, too. So I know we still got another month before budget's got to be done, and so we've got some time, so we don't have to finalize it today. But if you'd like to give us a chance to sit down with me on board to work some of these numbers over, we'll give it a good shot.
Yeah, greatly appreciated. We want all hands on deck. Donnie, I cut you off there for a second. Did you have another point?
No, just that I think we can certainly service that request that you're asking of us with no problem. And the good news is for Mr. Path is that most of the homework is done. We've got the data, so I think we could get through it pretty quickly. It's just figuring out how we want to put what in what pot.
And just a question, just to make sure I'm understanding. So council is not opposed to us looking at maybe a combination of the two options, because I think there's a way. It may take some time, but I think there's a way between leasing and potential continuous debt issuances that we could knock this thing out in the foreseeable future. So if that's something that is reasonable to you all, we could put together some models, work with Grayson on that, and then bring something back maybe for you guys to look at, maybe with the intention of we would have like the tax rate impact and all that ready to go for you guys. And, you could swap it, from one side to the other. That's not a problem at all. So we'll put together some models, make sure we're all on the same page on it, and then get you guys some more information. So
I agree. I think we've got to have a mechanism in place. It feels like we've inherited a few of these things, of like this can just been kicked down the road, and we're like, okay, we got to do something. We got to address this, get a mechanism in place, maybe the combination of debt issuance and cash for the non-leasable items. But I think it's a great, and we just have to do it. I don't think we have an option.
And I think another benefit from it too could be, we've kind of got some models run, but we're not assuming, over time. I was just looking on page 290 here. We spend almost $3 to $4 million in parts alone. Yeah. So just thinking, it may be hard to kind of predict what that looks like, but we will eventually start seeing savings. And right now, where you're basically your lease payment to the fleet, the rates you're paying to your fleet are half replacement and half maintenance. You may see that maintenance start coming down where you have more buying power essentially on your replacement side, which might help escalate this program.
I think you'll see that immediately.
Yes. And so I think we can work with the leasing groups a little bit on that as well. And if we work on right sizing the fleet, then I really think that this potentially could be, if it's done in combination, I think we could get a plan together.
Gotcha. My only question is on these repeated debt issuances. So when it comes time for future councils to reissue this debt, is it strictly going to be, say it's $7 million now? Well, in 8 years, they can only do $7 million again, or are they going to have to increase the tax rate?
So,
see what I'm saying?
Yes, I absolutely do. That's a great question. So
I don't know what the price will be on the lease.
Exactly. So as the cost of everything's going up, most likely the appraised values are going to be going up as well. And so that same tax rate is going to get you more in, say, 7 years, 8 years than it does right now. And so your buying power with your tax rate should be growing along with this.
Okay.
Yes.
But it is possible, yes.
Yeah, that is true.
It is possible they could have to ask for a little bit more.
Especially if we experience something like we did over the past few years where the price increase jumped so much, what we have in place might not.
To make sure I'm not missing something, and I know better than to be this naive, but would you also look at just the financial instrument of that tax note? So what you're saying right now is you would put us on a 7-year leasing mechanism, so we'd have an annual debt service on that. Well, that assumes that we're trying to lease the vehicle. So what I'm saying is, rather than paying cash outlay, we just finance it through our own tax instrument, our own note.
Yes, so that's what this would be. Part of it would be, instead of us paying cash to pay for things that are non-leasable, we would do a debt issuance. And then the other piece would be actually leasing those leasable type items.
Okay, so am I missing the boat here? Let's say you only had $1 million worth of leasable equipment, but you grabbed every piece of it, and you had $7 million worth of needs. The plan would still be for us to finance the $7 million. Yes. Over the next 7 years. We turn it into a revolving, note. So are we as hung up with you telling us like, oh, well, that didn't constitute all leasable equipment? Meaning, do I have to consider the leasable equipment, or can I just consider the equipment total?
So, you could do it a couple of ways. You could potentially do, you could do a debt issuance for all of it. Yeah. Yes. So I think that the beauty of the leasing side is that you have it turning a lot faster. Things stay under warranty, so all the work being done on it is warranty
better.
Work.
Big time.
Okay, so that's really the when you said hybrid, I think it takes us back to this. Does the 5.5 annual debt service cover that fullness of that note if you didn't have any of it leased?
So that would cover $8 million worth of vehicles and equipment that would not be able to be leased.
So that's great. So we really have the same 70% payment to purchase rate, right? So our payment is going to be 70% to our purchasing power. So then what you've got is you've got a procurement issue of having a big enough stick in the market to go and actually get that equipment.
Great
so
point.
I think we are asking for staff, go out and find us a leasing company and bring this back with something, figure out a way to lease $8 million worth of equipment every year. Okay. But if you don't do that, bring us back everything that we can get our hands on, just with our buying power and what that note looks like.
Okay.
And then I think this council would say the more money put into this model, the better. So $8 million to us looks better than $5 million in the ability to free up $2 million a year in cash proceeds versus $1 million. And so with that directive, I think if y'all could work hard on that, we'd love to see it in this budget session. If we don't, then we won't calculate that cash savings. But we would still push to get this implemented in this current council.
Can I add one more thing that I think is a very indirect piece of this that's important? One of the things that I've noticed that council has asked every single department up here is, what your staffing levels look like. Are you having trouble retaining employees? It's been proven that if you're driving new equipment, good equipment that's operable, that's not breaking down, that your retainage level of employees goes up, especially in what we do in public works. And I think that's an important piece that you can't really put a number to. But I think you're going to see employees more satisfied with their job, which keeps them here, which satisfies an entirely different goal.
Yeah. Donnie, do you have a schedule? I would guess year by year you've got equipment that needs to be replaced or
Yes.
leased. So you've got a schedule of fleet vehicles and the amount that it would take. So
Correct.
you can work with a company and say, this is what we need,
Yep.
and then this is what we've got to replace. So when we get that $8 million, we can allocate for the lease, but then we also know how much cash we've got to replace.
And that's a lot of what we've done already, but we did not do the ask on some of the bigger pieces. So I think that's the other thing that we'll take care of. And I can do that this afternoon.
Those are the cash-heavy pieces, like you said, the $235,000 on that
Right.
trash truck. at what point do we say, well, we just need to buy one?
I said we've already built a pretty good relationship with D&M. They've been really easy to work with, and they're probably the largest government leasing company that there is. So we can send them some data and see if they'll kick us something back. I don't know how long that'll take.
Okay.
But then again, meeting and just analyzing it with Mr. Path and with Laura will help a lot as well.
And I kind of foresee, I think, maybe, Mayor, to your point, I see us kind of bringing back 3 models maybe. So it would be, 1, if we can lease everything. If we can find a way, if we can lease everything, what that looks like. 2 is, what if we just debt funded everything? What would that look like on a rotating basis? And then 3 would be the hybrid, some sort of a hybrid model in between the 2 of those. And then we could talk about that with you all.
Yep.
And kind of get some direction. And the hope is, again, we'll see how it goes, but the hope is I would like for us to try to work within what we've got built in the budget, and see what we can get done and project out and see if that works, without having to come back and ask for a big ask from the general fund standpoint to even start a program. So we'll see what we can come up with.
We can also, Chief Kubo just sent me a message too, saying that the leasing company they're working with also do some public works equipment too. So we may be able to have a couple of options to look at. So thank you for that. I mean, today was really to present the problem to you with several options for solutions, and I think we've accomplished what we were trying to do today for sure. So thank you for that.
Right. Yeah.
It's 11:40. We need to probably walk over here in 10 to 15.
Yeah.
You have CIP, right?
So we had gone over most of the CIP yesterday with Kyle and his team. So at this point, I was going to start maybe trying to go over some of the information that had been requested over the last few days and kind of start sharing that with you guys. Do you all want to just start going through the list, or do you have?
Maybe so. Has council all had an opportunity to look through CIP? Since we ran that yesterday, I know we didn't fully get to like, hey, do you want to move anything around? I almost feel like, and CIP is one of those where I told council last year, hey, I want you to know you can continue to move things through the year. We're going to have something that's going to become a need, and it's going to go into the current year usually. So not urgent for you to feel like speak now or forever hold your peace on this is the only thing that gets fixed. If we take that same concept, it gives it over to staff. Honestly, you guys know better where you're at and producing some of those projects and getting them turned out.
Sure.
I think we want more accountability of, well, it was in CIP, but we didn't do it.
Okay.
So we
absolutely.
want those CIP projects to get done. But I don't know that we have to spend a lot of time on those CIP projects if you're comfortable closing that one out.
I think we're in really good shape. The only kind of follow-up I think that I had was, I know we had talked about some concerns about how much funding was going towards those APD lockers. And so I've kind of got a running list of things that we have discussed over the last few days, additional information, but then also I kind of started running a list of the working budget and some options on some various things. And one of the items that I know we had talked about was that there was a little bit of heartburn on how much was in the APD lockers. And then also, possibly adding a little bit of funding to parks for CIP as well. And so I've got a list from Parks on some CIP that if y'all wanted to look at, I could hand that out to you guys. Part of it is to use the rest of those bond proceeds, and then part would be if they had some extra funding about, we just said 500, if that was the number, what they would do with something like that. So I do have some information I could pass out related to that, and wanted maybe to get some feedback or what y'all's thoughts were on if you wanted to reduce down those APD lockers. Did y'all have a target amount you wanted us just to stay within, or what were thoughts on that?
So in looking at that, I know that those are not typical just metal lockers, and so just in a per locker average, I don't think you have to build 500, even though you could have 500 in there. So building the space and not implementing the equipment is always smart, so you didn't limit yourself. But 350 lockers, you got 350 uniformed officers over there, I believe, currently. So if you said, well, let's do 400, I think that's a good number, because our hiring capability is 380, right? 385.
Yeah,
something like that.
380 is what, yes.
So
our
400
authorization.
lockers, average price per locker would get you, roughly 160K. I think if you bring us back something at $200,000, that would be my max of feeling comfortable of being a good steward over those monies. You're talking about a Cat 6 cable that you could plug into and a 110 power outlet.
Okay.
And so these do come with something a little bit more so, but, being able to shop them internationally, it is something we want good quality, but we don't necessarily have to buy it down the street or custom build it. So the number that would come out of that budget's $1 million to go back over to the $2.5 million that you pulled out of streets.
Okay.
And then that would leave council pulling another $1.5 million out of their working budget to go back to streets.
Okay. Yes. So a couple of other quick things just to make you all aware of. Mayor's probably very aware of this because he sits on this board. So let's talk quickly about the LGC retail space that sold recently. So on that, there was a loan that the city had with LGC for that retail space. And what that covered essentially was for a period of time, and I don't remember how many years, it was several years, they had a management contract over there to help try to lease out that space, and the city was loaning money to LGC to cover that. And so once the retail space sold, it stopped that loan, obviously, and there was interest that was accruing on that loan, and nothing has ever been paid since that loan kind of started. And so interest was accruing and just adding into the principal balance, and then more interest accrued. Anyways, that came out to be, it was a little over $400,000 from that. It was $419,371. that we are going to receive a payment from LGC this year for, okay? So I've put that kind of as like one-time funding that you all could use. So I've kind of got a running list. So adding that almost $420,000, okay, that's coming in this year. Along with the city, along with that same agreement, the city had said they would loan up to, I think it was about $1 million between that space and retail finish out. So we had set up a job or like a project in our financial software and reserved the budget in our general construction fund, and the amount that will basically get released now and go back into reserve so it could be used for one-time capital or something like that. It's $925,178. So between those two items, you've got about a little over 1.3 million more in one-time funding that you can work with. If you don't want to do anything with it, we can certainly just let it roll through reserves and we can rebalance it and bring it back in a future budget. That's fine too. So I just wanted to throw those things out because I don't know that we've talked about that.
I appreciate it. I think we want to gather up just conceptually. I think this council wants to gather up all of our ideas. I got a full page here that totals $20 million.
Okay.
And so I think we can get everybody's out there. We want to gather up everything that we have capability to. And then I would like to work this afternoon going through, that one's $1 million, but it has a little risk to it. This one over here is $1 million with no risk. Like, let's pull this in and then let's start dispersing this money.
Okay.
Based on what we think. And then I think it's good to leave council $3-4 million working budget again.
Okay.
Paid off this last year. But whatever that amount is in the working budget will get us where we need to go. And specifically, I think we were looking for, is that $10 million outlook of pay increases viable? Can we do that $10,000 increase on the low end, $5,000 increase on the high end, and does that total up to that $8 million that we were throwing out? So if you have those numbers, I think that's what we're looking for after lunch.
Sure. Yeah, we've got all those numbers on everything. We've got a couple of other things. We just had some loose ends that just a couple of things we wanted to bring up as well, so we can talk about that this afternoon as well. Wanted to talk, Mayor, I know you're a little bit in the loop on this, on the potential loan lease payment for some space over at the new day center with the GSRC. Wanted to talk about that a little bit as well and get some direction from you all.
Yeah, I was curious if that was built into community development's budget.
No, we don't have anything
Okay.
built in. And community development would not be able to pay for that. It would have to come out of general fund.
Oh, it would. Okay. Yeah, so that would be one that would be good to talk through
Okay,
today.
so we can talk about that this afternoon as well. We also have a potential proposed land swap with Potter County. I think we've talked a little bit about this, but to facilitate future growth over in the Transformation Park area. They own all that land just to the west of where the day center is going to be. We have talked with them about potentially swapping some property and them giving us that property and them moving to our Line Street property where our drainage utility department is. And so we've got some information on that if y'all, that we can update you on. And then really just working through various ideas that I heard from each council member over the past several weeks. We've priced things out, and then all the things we've talked about the last few days. The other thing is Casey is available to come back at 1:30 or 2 today if you want to talk more about public health. She could bring updates on what the COVID funding was used for, and if council were to allocate some one-time funding towards them, what she would propose using that for, if you would like us to have her come back after lunch.
Council, you guys have any preferences on what we do for, I'm going to say we could be back here by 1:30 anyway. We could leave more like 1:15 over there, just depending on, I think they only have 6 badges, so it shouldn't take as long. Kind of depends on how long everybody takes to eat. But as soon as we're back, we could push through maybe 3 o'clock, 3:30. Is that kind of a good time for everyone? I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's get back in here and let's start with where you left off. So
Okay.
You've got some good things that you and staff are keyed in on that are priorities. We have our ideas here that are priorities. I would tell you, let's bring public health back at 3.
Okay.
And let's try to set aside a few minutes just to let Mrs. Stoughton kind of present, hey, here's our preparedness items that if you were willing to give us money, this is what we'd go out and buy and do with it. And then she could tell us about the COVID funding for sure. So say 3 o'clock on that, and a goal of 3:30, which really means 5:15, right? So hopefully 3:30, we'll get somewhat wound up here. Okay. Do we have anything else before we recess for lunch? 11:50 right now. Recess for lunch. Everybody who can, APD graduation. We'll try to call ourselves back in over here no later than 1:30. Thank y'all.